Yeah. I'm gonna be calling the meeting to order here in just a sec, as long as we've got all staff is all ready. The quote for today is from an extremely long speech that Teddy Roosevelt made at the Sorbonne way back in 1915 or something. And it was provided by Aaron. Thank you very much, Director Wharton. Teddy Roosevelt said to a crowd of graduating Sorbonne students, it is in the context of it is he was basically letting people know that you guys are the privileged ones, so go be good being privileged since you're privileged. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. Thank you, Director Wharton. I did not bring my bang bang gavel, so I'm going to call the meeting to order with my hand. And if you would all please make sure your phones are silenced, and then please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We do have a quorum. All 5 directors are here today. And again, I just want to remind you, if you would like to make public comments, slips are in the entryway. Just fill them out and bring it over to Ms. Madrid, who will bring it to me, and we'll get you in on an item on the agenda. And make sure your electronic devices are silenced so we don't get interrupted by them. Are there any agenda reviews? This is agenda review. Are there any additions or deletions for the agenda? Mr. Gruber? Okay. Anyone? All right. Then we can move straight to public safety, the Sheriff Department report.
Hello.
Welcome.
Hi. My name's Sergeant Odom. Standing in for Commander Vogue today. Is it on? All right. Standing in for Commander Vogue today. Basically, from July 25th to August 21st, we've had about 125 calls for service in this area. About 20 of those were suspicious circumstances or suspicious subjects or suspected criminal acts. 1 phone scam. 26 calls of disturbing the peace. About 15 check the welfare type of calls. 3 thefts, 21 audible alarms that were all false, and 5 burglaries. I would say for notable incidences, we had basically a shoplifting incident at Parts Unknown clothing store on July 30th. Cody Flammer, I don't know if you guys are familiar with him, but he's a local, and he's done some shoplifting there before, and basically we had to do a citizen's arrest, which basically involves misdemeanors not committed in our presence. For the most part, we have to do a citizen's arrest where the citizen, the store owner, or the victim can place the person under arrest, and then we take them in front of a magistrate. Central Lagoon Restaurant, there was a little altercation there on August 4th where a man was hit in the head with a beer bottle trying to break up a fight. And then on August 6th, we had an incident with the subject who went barricade after assaulting his grandmother, Jamie Rimbach, who's a local Cambria man we've been dealing with for a while. And he beat up his grandmother utilizing a broomstick, and she was taken to Sierra Vista Hospital. And he barricaded himself in the residence for a couple of hours. We brought up a crisis negotiator and surrounded the residence. After about 2 hours of negotiations, he surrendered peacefully and was taken into custody for assault with a deadly weapon. So that's all I have.
Does anybody have any questions for the sheriff? We appreciate you coming today and giving us the report.
Thank you very much.
Next up, we have the CCSD Fire Chief's report. Good afternoon, Chief Hollingsworth.
Good afternoon. Thank you for letting me be here today. In the month of July, we had 93 emergency responses on the fire side. Of those, just under 77% were rendered to local personnel or local patients or constituents. Just over 23% were non-local, which brings us to the year-to-date average of about 80% local versus 20% non-local, which is fairly consistent with what we've been seeing. Fire hydrant maintenance up to 217 of the hydrants. Again, there's been a little bit of a drop-off just because limited personnel and hours and time balanced against everything else, but we're still making progress on there. I'm really happy to say that we were able to commit a crew up to the car fire in Reading. They've since been back, but they were able to participate for quite a bit in regards to not only some of the structure protection, but then also the repopulation efforts of people being allowed back in and helping search through some of their materials after it had been burned through. So they were a critical component of that, but that crew is back. So a big thanks to Captain Gibson, Engineer Castellanos, and the firefighters Shank and Salas that went up to that. Now, connected to that a little bit is one of the things I want to just stress on safety-wise for our community is that we have a zero-tolerance burning policy within the CCSD lines. We have adopted a local amendment to our municipal code and expanded the fire code. The only way you can actually burn on your property is for food in a barbecue or in one of those listed approved chimney type or gas fed or pellet type devices that has a full 1/8 mesh screen on it or some kind of device. The reason I bring that up is in the past 2 weeks there's been either 3 or 4 direct calls to the fire station, usually about 10 o'clock at night, by somebody saying, hey, I see a fire over in my neighbor's backyard and it's 6 feet high. So I do ask that we don't want people to pry into other people's business, but that's a safety issue and it's a violation of our own municipal code. So if you do see that, don't hesitate to call us. We're happy to go out. Remember, our goal on all of this is compliance. It's not punitive, and we have a very good response from people and just explain. And usually it's just people not familiar with the local laws. So just as a reminder publicly that that's the case. There's a handful of things I wanted to share with you that are coming up that are, I think, real important for the community, and all of these are going to be available on our website through the CCSD on the upcoming events. The first is that we are hosting our annual Encore Peer-to-Point fundraiser for the Encore team. This is a real fun event where people use kayaks, standing paddle boards and things, and they'll go from the pier in San Simeon all the way up to Leffingwell Landing. That's a 6-mile course, and it's going to be on the morning of September 22nd. So please feel free to enroll for that and join, and you can just you can either download or come to the fire station, get that information, and register for that. Commander Vogue a couple of months ago brought up the fact that there's been some community interest in the active shooter program, just basically education for our community. And Sergeant Nichols with the Sheriff's Department is going to be hosting a training that is going to be held here at the Vets Hall on the evening of September 19th at 5 o'clock. This is also available on the website. There's no registration needed. This is not training as we would get as emergency responders with the vests and helmets and all that kind of stuff to go to this incident. This is how to handle one of these if you're in the community that happens at your business or at the store or at your church, and then what are you supposed to do? This would be a very good event for the community at large to attend. We're hoping for excellent turnout here, and this is a great opportunity to get some more information. And then the last thing that's on the website as well is that we are going to be hosting our next annual chipping event, which we were able to get funding through the Fire Safe Council of San Luis Obispo County. You can register for that by getting the information offline and then turning it into the fire station, and that needs to be turned in by the 14th of September. They'll hopefully be chipping within the next week. Normally, it'll take up to about 2 days to go through all the registrants that have turned in that stuff, but it's a great way to reduce the fuel accumulation on your own property. And then the last thing I wanted to mention today is that you've probably, as you've driven around the community, seen a lot of chipping and roadside work and vegetation clearance. And I'm real happy to say that this is all secondary to some funds that were lasting from the previous Fire Safe Council grants. And so what they're really focusing on right now is highway and roadside clearance and abatement along the Highway 1 corridor. A lot of work has been done on the Cambria Pines Road corridor up in the Lamert area of the community. And as time and money allows, they're going to be going back up to Bridge Street and hopefully pre-treating and taking care of that entire area on the east side of Bridge Street, which hasn't been addressed yet. So those are excellent projects. As we look at the history of how many large fires are started by roadside ignitions from either chains being drug or cars or overheated engines, and if I date myself by saying catalytic converters, some of those things will come apart and do that. It still happens. So if we can remove and reduce the fuel on the sides of the roads, we might be able to address some of those issues. And as part of that, that's all with grant money that's already been received and they're trying to total out. I'm really happy to say that our Fire Safe Council has been very aggressive and was awarded this cycle all 4 grants they applied for, which is $3.9 million in fuel reduction projects for the entire county. Now, what that means specifically for the Cambria and North Coast area is $1.8 million of that is specifically for the Monterey pine tree mortality problem. And as this is the only part of the county that has a Monterey pine forest, that money comes here. So there is a whole totality of work and a plan that's going to be addressed in regards to dead tree removal, down tree removal, litter removal on the ground, trying to address some of that problem, trying to not only make a much healthier forest, but then also making it as more fire safe as possible. So as time starts to progress and we have more information from Dan Turner, the business manager with the Fire Safe Council, and how they plan to address that, this is going to be happening over the next 3 to 4 years, depending on, we're actually to a point where they have enough money and don't know who they can hire to do the work because there's so much stuff out there to do. So that's a good problem to have, and we're just hoping they're going to be able to bring in some additional crews and some other resources to help with that process. So you should be seeing more of that work being done locally, and that's all I have for you today.
Mr. Gruber, can we,
Yes, ma'am.
if you, through you, can we make sure that those dates and events get sent as a press release to the Cambrian, since Kathy Tanner's not here today because our hours are limited? Can we make sure that that gets sent to the Cambrian?
Yes, and we also, I believe, have them on the website, but I'll double check also.
That's great, but I want to make sure it gets in the paper too, and since she's not here today, to make it would be helpful.
Got it.
Thank you, Chief Hollingsworth.
Yes, ma'am.
Does anybody have any questions? Okay, thank you for coming.
Website.
Every meeting, we set aside some time for general public comment on items that are not on today's agenda, but are within the jurisdiction of this district. And each speaker will have 3 minutes, and we go by the cards in the order they were received, and we're going to start out with Sherry Bell, followed by Aaron Hankey.
Yeah.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. Whoops. Hold on. Okay. We're in the 3rd year of the most recent CCSD-approved 5-year rate increase. Rates were increased by 4% effective March 1, 2016, 2017, and 2018, and are scheduled to increase by 4% again on March 1, 2019, and 20 if the current proposed increases are defeated with the Prop 218 protest. In 2016, the reasons given for the 5-year rate increases were to restore balanced budgets, fund investment in Cambria's aging infrastructure, and inflation. Since then, the board and/or the general manager have made the following decisions. One, effective March 1 of 16, as the first rate increase went into effect, the CCSD decided to suspend surcharges for exceeding water allotments, even though the CCSD was in dire need of funds, and the surcharges collected from March of 14 to February of 16 added $770,923 to the coffers. Two, shortly after increasing our rates, members of the board argued for and subsequently approved the general manager's substantial salary and benefit increase, one that exceeded that of 41 United States governors. In October of 2017, two board members, one sitting and one who subsequently resigned, argued for and voted to purchase the old library building, which needed substantial renovations and repairs, even though the district did not have the money for it and could not even qualify for the loan to purchase it. Fortunately, the two board members were outvoted. The number 4 spent millions of dollars on the non-operating, unpermitted, poorly designed boondoggle on San Simeon Creek Road, which is still under a cease and desist order and has not provided one single drop of water to the residents of Cambria. Spent over $300,000 for a lobbyist, and only recently, after persistent public outcry, canceled his contract. 6, did not make any substantial investment in our aging infrastructure. Now the CCSD wants to raise our rates again. Why? Same old song, to fund investment in Cambria's aging infrastructure. The same excuse they gave us the last time around before they approved rate increases for July 1, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20. If Prop 218 is unsuccessful this time, by July 20, with the proposed increases effective November 1, 18, July 1, 19, July 1, 20, single-family residences will see a 33% increase in water rates, a 56% increase in the sustainable water facility fixed services rates, and a 49% increase in metered water use, and a 52% increase in sewer rates. I cannot support another rate increase while the ratepayers' checkbook is controlled by the current general manager under the leadership of the board of directors as it stands today. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
7 seconds to go. I can't believe it.
Aaron Hankey, followed by Matthew.
President Rice and fellow members of the board, thanks for your time. My name is Aaron Hankey. I'm here as a representative for No on Measure G. Measure G, for those of you that are not familiar with it, will be on the ballots this November, and if passed, will result in a complete shutdown of the oil and gas industry here in our county within 2 to 3 years. This shutdown will result in the loss of over 200 jobs, as well as millions in annual revenue that goes to public safety, our local education systems, as well as vital public programs here. Once again, here's a representative of No on Measure G, and I hope and urge the board to take a no position on the measure. With that being said, I thank you for your time. And if there are any questions, please let me know.
Thank you very much for your
All right.
comments.
Yep.
Matthew?
Could I get some clarification when you say this is potentially about shutting down the local gas industry? Are we talking about gas that when you turn on your stove, gas comes out? Or are we talking about when you put it in your car?
This is car, sir. Yeah, this is the oil and gas industry. So specifics into regard to the Aurora Grande oil field.
All right. If you said that, I'm sorry I didn't hear it. Thank you.
No, I did not. So, yeah, thank you for clarification.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you. Matthew, followed by Don Howell.
Hello. I have a simple request of this board. I would like to see this board pass a resolution honoring the women and some men who have done so much to get information out to the public in this town the last 2 or 3 or 4 years. And I'm speaking of Mary Webb, Elizabeth Bettenhausen, Tina Dickinson, Sherry Bell, and others whose names I can't remember. But I myself would not know fact from fiction from hearsay if it weren't for these studious women who on their own research this stuff and get actual documents into the public hands. I couldn't do without it. And I don't think anyone in this community could say that they could do without this information. I would like to see that happen. I'd like to see it printed in the newspaper. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Don Howell, followed by Mike Lyons.
Thank you. Don Howell, Cambria. Before I begin, I would definitely like to an enthusiastic second to Matthew's statement. I, for one, especially in the many times, the long times when I've only watched the meetings, much less embroiled myself in what's going on, it was largely their commentary which brought to my attention stuff that I would not otherwise have known. After wading through all the material, it is a complicated issue, the management of this district, and it's hard enough, I'm sure, as a board member to do it, but for us out here, it's even harder. Having said that, a few words about the rate increase. As you all know, I have to take this job. As you all know, and have heard more than once from me, I am definitely and heartily, emphatically in favor of the sewer rate increase. I want to be sure everyone understands that. And having seen the sewer plant, having listened to the discussions of the infrastructure committee, I cannot in any conscience advocate that that rate should be protested. On the other hand, I would commend the board for agreeing to post on its website a protest form that contain all three possible rate increases. I think that's a very good step to making things open and that the public is involved. However, I think the board did miss a bet, however, in not including that form in the announcement that was sent out. I think that would have gone a long, long way to possibly having the increase succeed, number one, but even more important, that it would be a clear demonstration that this board really does trust the public to make a good decision, rather than that to give the idea that one is trying to, heaven forbid, trick the public or get something by them by simply making it hard for them to get information or hard for them to give their opinions. So I kind of regret that, but at the same time congratulate the board for putting it out on the website, and I do appreciate that. And I also appreciate something that was not clear during the rate discussions, which was that the increases could in fact be protested separately. During the discussions, I think, as you recall my remarks, I was concerned that if you did it as an all-or-nothing situation, you're very likely going to lose on all fronts. So anyway, thank you again for that beginning initial thing, but I do urge you to consider taking action similar that might be a little more open to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Mike Lyons. It's my last request to speak. Yes?
I'd like to thank Don Howell for bringing up the fact that these can be protested individually. It was brought to my attention there's a form being handed out by the post office that does not break these down individually, and it's a mass increase. So the public needs to know there are two forms out there. One that allows the rates to be protested individually, and then one covers the blanket no on them all. Thanks for bringing that up, Don.
Thank you, Mike Lyons. I went to my doctor a couple months ago, needing a physical every 5 years or so, and after a head-to-toe exam and back into the doctor's consultation room, I expected him to say the usual, which is, well, you certainly could use a loss of about 25 pounds, but we're not arguing about that because you're Irish and you're going to drink beer and eat potatoes, so we're not going there. But he did say, the most important thing he said to me is, have you talked to your accountant lately? And I think you should. And I said, Doctor, if I wanted to talk to my accountant, why would I come here for a physical exam? And he says, well, I think I have good news for you. I think you're going to live another 25 years or more. You're in good health. Signs look good. So I sighed, and he said, well, isn't that good news? I said, well, yes, it is. I do enjoy living. I feel good. I'd like to live longer. But there is a problem here, and that is I live in a small town named Cambria, and I've lived here for 26 years, and now I'm facing, but mostly water-wise, for another 25 years. And that bothers me. So I got to thinking about it. And I thought, well, you know what? I've provided well enough for my future with investments and Social Security and things like that. But what I need to think about, and what I think we all need to think about more carefully, is let's invest enough in our own infrastructure, in our own physical plant, to make sure that we can all live here in the future and live here comfortably and safely. So I think, well, number one, the water department is doing well. I've always been able to turn my tap on, but inflation is there. I can't change that. I think they deserve an increase if they say they need it. And there's a long list of semi-approved or preliminary approved projects that seem to be very reasonable. The same thing with the wastewater. In fact, more important with the wastewater. The third component is the SWF. Previous boards have very wisely taken the situation into their hands and bravely put together a marvelous machine out here, which we will be able to use at our will someday. And that all those things require investment for living here. I, for one, would like to live here another 20 or 25 years. And I ask my fellow Cambrians to consider that if they want to stay with the idea that, well, we managed all historically to get through these droughts by the skin of our teeth, by economizing and conserving on water, don't count on that. We all know that global warming is upon us, and it's a very serious matter. And I ask you, fellow Cambrians, not to protest these 3 water rates increases, because you're gambling with my future as well as yours. Think twice.
Comments? One more public speaker, Dennis Perry.
Good afternoon. Dennis Perry, Cambria. I think we just experienced a hit and run by the oil industry lobby, and that was the no on Measure G speech, and then he left. I think it's time in human history that we recognize we have to leave the carbon in the ground and use alternative sources. We already have so much electricity that the state of California has to pay other states to take it away and pump more oil. I think we should be looking at using that power that we're generating already and paying people to take. What I'd like to address today is requesting the board, as we talked about last time, look at moving up dates for weed abatement and dry brush abatement, hazard abatement for fire prevention. We already have seen this year over 500,000 acres burned, probably within the last month since we had our last meeting. So I think it's important that the board look at the dates, consider moving them up, and as we said last time, if we have to have 2 mowings in order to accomplish keeping the town safe, I think that's what we have to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Gruber, on the subject of rate protests, we do have protest forms available if people go into the office, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And they are just on the counter or whatever, so it's not a...
They have to ask for them.
They have to ask, is it something that we could just kind of make some and put them on? I mean, I want to make it easy for folks. And then do the people that are working the front desk know that it's supposed to be by the person who signed it?
Yes.
When they turn it in?
When the board decided to move forward with this process, the second time, even the first time, I'm sorry. When the board decided to move forward with the process, we trained and briefed all the staff on the proper procedures on the Prop 218 and how to handle those and everything like that. So absolutely. And it's on the form also. So.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, that takes us to the next. I'm sorry, Director Pearson.
Also on the rates, if you're going to protest, I would like someone, especially the wastewater system, if you're going to protest that, I'd like you, before you do that, to go ahead and get a tour of the wastewater plant. As Mr. Howell said, that's very instructive as to exactly where we stand out there. There are dates on a lot of equipment out there of 1970s, and then there was actually a bit of an upgrade in the 90s, again over 20 years ago. So an awful lot of that equipment is very ancient. So I think, Mr. Gruber, you would be able to accommodate people to take a tour out there if they really wanted to. They should contact your office and try to set that up.
One of the things we're working on right now is to have a standing date once a month for, let's say, the first 12 or 15 people that sign up. I'll be working with Monique and Haley on this in the next day or so to have scheduled tours of our facilities, specifically the wastewater treatment plant, the sustainable water facility, and then the well fields if they would like. And what we'll do is we'll have a cap at those amount of people, maybe the first 15 or so that sign up, and then have it as a standing date every month so myself and the staff can show them those facilities. We think that's a good idea. We've already been talking about it. So,
Anyone else before we move on? Okay, then let's move on to the consent agenda. Are there any items to pull for consent? Director Farmer?
Yeah, thank you. I don't know if I want to pull them for consent, pull them from the consent agenda, but just like to do a, brief overview of the expenditure report as I choose to do every month, and hopefully that's okay. Is that okay?
Go ahead.
Thank you. So first, there's an item, and I would imagine even though there aren't the usual attendees here to kind of take a closer look at the expenditure report to bring it to our attention. I know there's folks out there that have looked at the expenditure report and are concerned about some items, and I'm just going to address like maybe 3-4 of them. And so the first one would be on page 9. Which is page 5 of 12 of the expenditure report, and it's the item right at the top of the page that has finance and clerk desks installation. 50% deposit, just a shade over $4,000, and I would imagine people kind of would look at that and say, well, just more expenses up there at the office. But having recently gone to the office and got an explanation on this, let's put it this way. It seems like it's a short-term expenditure for a long-term saving. So perhaps our general manager or district clerk could explain what this is about. Is that okay?
yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Director Farmer.
I know it's in your general manager's report, but I thought I'd get to it right now.
No, I think that's good. Absolutely. So we're going to incur about between $10,000 and $12,000 cost up front to redesign our office up there. What we're doing is we're sacrificing one of our units, one of our buildings, if you will. We essentially rent 2 units. The facility is about 4,000 square feet altogether. The office is where the district engineer is now, and the accounts payable, and the finance manager, and Melissa. We've walled that area off, and our contract is up in October, and we're essentially yielding those offices back to the owner. And that's $1,000 a month, which is about comes to $12,000 a year. With the walling and the furniture and the reconfiguration of the office, the payback is estimated to be between 9 months and 12 months. But more importantly would be the workflow product. And the main reason we did this is for staff continuity reasons. We now have our future finance manager. That office will have their staff readily available to them, and so the workflow will be a lot better. So thank you for bringing that up. We're gonna have a payback in about 10 to 12 months, and again $1,000 a month on our rent savings. So.
All right, thank you. Also on the same page, but down at the bottom, JB Doer. And of course, there's always a monthly entry regarding JB Doer for the cost for gasoline, either diesel or regular gasoline, and it's for the fire department or for facilities and resources. And I notice, the numbers fluctuate from month to month, and I know there's various reasons for that. But what I'm curious about, and I know other people have, over the years, and especially recently, have asked me, well, we understand that people at water and wastewater, and now with the new chief plant operator at the water facility, that these people are allowed to drive company or district vehicles home, and the gas is paid for by the district. And like I say, people have expressed their concern about this to me. So I'm just curious why, while there is accounting for the gasoline money spent for fire and for facilities and resources, why we don't see separate entries for water, wastewater, and for now the water facility.
I can answer that, Director Farmer. There's only pumps at those two facilities, at the fire and facilities and resources. Is this still on? Oh, okay, I'm sorry. So they have key cards that, with a certain card, water has, say, number 1, 2, 3, 4 cards, and those are logged, and then that log is sent over, and the costs are allocated out based on their actual usage, rather than having separate pumps at every location, which would be more expensive, more equipment to, need repair, et cetera. So the costs are accounted for by water and wastewater, but only as far as where it's delivered, it's only delivered to one place.
Okay, I can understand that. Is there a way, since people are using these separate cards, each of the various employees are using separate cards, is there a way, therefore, to ascertain the amount of money that's being spent at these various areas? Like I said, at wastewater and at the water facility. Is that a possibility?
Not on the expenditure report, which is mainly a matter of timing, because generated based on the checks that are written. And at the time when the fuel's delivered, it's unknown. You would be breaking out future activity, which of course is impossible. So, for instance, that's something I actually was just working on earlier today. The facilities and resources sent me the information. I list, how much each unit or each department uses, figure the average cost of the gasoline, and it's broken out by journal entry. And then and it's not here now, but, I plan on having it for next board meeting, a report on the financial activity, and it would be broken out there. As far as that goes.
So you're actually telling me right now that you can break it down into each department?
Well, it is already being broken down. Not that I can, it is. But it can't be done on the expenditure report because it would be, this is what we pay for as the fuel is delivered. We don't know who's going to use that fuel until it's actually used.
All right. Then may I request that in some fashion, that you're able to, how could I say this, provide us with more information as to how much each department, if it's not in the expenditure report somewhere, where we know what each department is spending on fuel for commuting from home to office, so to speak.
Well, that would be impossible because the card is used, they may be going to a job here or there, and
all right, I guess
I just get the information based on how much is charged to that card, and I have a list of what card belongs to what department.
Okay,
what exactly it's used for, accounting or finance certainly can't provide that.
All right, well, I guess I'll take that as that it can't be done. So moving on page 13, and this is just curiosity. Page 13, just maybe about the fourth, fifth line down, where it's with regard to the LAFCO charges for the CCSD. It's about $25,500, and actually it's $26,500. I would just like an explanation for myself and for the community at large, since that's a fairly substantial amount. LAFCO, the Local Agency Formation Commission, why we're paying that money and what do we get from it?
That's a very good question. The revenue generated from the different public agencies really funds LAFCO's budget in its entirety. And if you look at the breakdown of LAFCO's budgets, I think we're probably one of the most expensive. It's based on the size and complexity of the district. So this is a one-time annual fee that we pay LAFCO. And I'm just going to throw a figure out. Say LAFCO's budget with their executive officer and their staff and things like that is $500,000, and you have X amount of public agencies throughout the county. Each one of those pool their money or pay an annual fee to support LAFCO's activities. So it's something that we're required to do. And it goes up by ticks every year a little bit because their budget goes up.
Ticks.
It goes up by ticks every year, but it is a substantial amount. But it's the agreement, if you will, between us and LAFCO. Cities pay it, other special districts pay it, and then those funds are pooled together, and that's how LAFCO is supported.
Now, I understand that it's a legitimate necessity, but what I also asked was, what does our community get in return for this, for the money that's spent?
It's a good question.
Maybe
Mr. Rice can answer.
Mr. Carmel would like to chime in.
Well, for an example,
LAFCO is the Local Agency Formation Commission, which their mandate from the state is to ensure efficient and organized services to the communities within the county they serve, and it was designed to prevent urban sprawl. And so whenever, say, San Luis wants to annex a part that's not incorporated already into San Luis Obispo City, they would have to go through a process with LAFCO to get that permission to do that. Some counties have areas where they have 17 different agencies serving the same little section, and they all do their own little thing. We have 3 here, the cemetery district and the healthcare district and us, and our districts don't exactly match up, but our powers also don't match up. But what LAFCO's in most counties do is they help with consolidations, or if a city wants to form, it's all about making sure that we have effective and efficient local government services. One of the things we get is every 5 years there's a municipal services review that reviews what services are provided to the community. It's mostly an agency that oversees and makes sure that any growth doesn't turn into sprawl or inefficient services provided to the community.
And if you were ever interested in expanding your boundaries, it would have to go through LAFCO. If you were interested in absorbing another agency, that would have to go through LAFCO. And there's something called a sphere of influence where it relates to your boundaries. Any changes within, if we wanted to step outside of our boundaries, if you will, that would have to go to LAFCO for approval. So I hope between President Rice and myself, those answered some of your questions.
Well, thank you, and thank you, President Rice. We know you're out there attending a whole lot of meetings and getting involved, so now we've reaped the results.
Director Clift used to serve on the board of the LAFCO when he was on this board. So.
Right. Okay, and then finally on the next page, page 14, first off, I sincerely want to comment on and let's say commend how the monthly costs related to the facility, whether you want to call it EWF, SWF, AWTP, or so forth, have decreased in recent months. And that's something I'm sure all Cambrians, no matter where you stand on the facility are grateful for. In fact, there's really, for the first time in recent memory, only one amount of any consequence with regard to the facility up at San Simeon Creek Road. And of course, if we look at page 14, it's the payment of the bank loan of just under $330,000, which we do twice a year until August of 2034. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. I would entertain a motion on the consent agenda.
I move that we approve the consent agenda.
By the way, can I also ask, are the minutes for the special meeting of July 11th also on the consent agenda?
Yes.
Excuse me for being slightly confused here.
That's all right.
But that happens. So just a couple of,
Are there some corrections to the minutes?
very minor. And I have a feeling that my fellow board member, Mr. Pearson, is aware of those two corrections. So the first one would be, and it's under regular business, and the last name under public comment is spelled Karen, P-I-E-R-S-O-N, and that Pearson should be P-E-A-R-S-O-N. That happens to be my landlady, but it was Karen Pearson. The other Karen Pearson is not his wife, who is not Karen. And then it says right under that, committee member, and this is with regard to the Finance Committee, it says committee member Pearson stated we need policies and so forth. Director Pearson is actually the chair of the committee. So I just think to just kind of state it the way it is, I would appreciate if it said Chairperson Pearson instead of committee member, because he's more than just a committee member. Just minor items. Thank you.
Is there a second for the motion to pass the consent agenda?
I second.
Don't all jump at once. So motion by Vice President Berenger, seconded by Director Wharton, to pass the consent agenda. We're going to take a vote here, and then I'm going to make a comment. Let's have a roll call, please, on the motion to pass the three items on consent.
Vice President Berenger?
Aye.
Director Pearson?
Aye.
Director Wharton?
Aye.
Director Farmer?
I neglected to mention what item, so I'll just pass on it. Aye.
President Rice?
Aye. And with that vote, we also have now appointed Mr. Don Howell to the Infrastructure Committee as a replacement for Merle Clift, who was appointed by Director Pearson. So welcome to the committee officially. Which brings us now to hearings and appeals. Mr. Gruber.
Thank you, Madam President. Item 5A is public hearing to discuss the adoption of Resolution 26, 2018, approve the final CCSD budget for fiscal year 2018. Staff's recommendation is to receive a staff presentation on the budget, receive public input, and discuss and adopt the final budget for fiscal year 2018 and provide direction to staff. Just to go over some highlights included in the staff report, and then we'll turn it back over to the board for any questions for Alan and I. I'd really like to thank the finance manager, interim finance manager, Alan Labossiere, for stepping in and really just doing a superb job until we can find a permanent replacement for the finance manager role. He's done a lot of cleanup, and although there are some concerns still within this budget, I think overall it's a good budget. Attached is a fiscal year budget that would authorize total revenues and other sources of funds, expenditures, and other use of funds, and changes to the general fund, wastewater fund, sustainable water facility operating fund, and the sustainable water facility capital fund balance as shown. Attached for the board's review and consideration is the final budget. The general manager, which is myself, and the interim finance manager have spent a great deal of time carefully going over the budget for accuracy and several of the questions that have been raised in the fiscal year 18-19 preliminary budget was presented to the board and have been addressed and resolved. The administrative cost allocation methodology was reviewed and addressed and resolved with the assistance from the Finance Committee. I'd like to thank the Finance Committee. Unfortunately, I wasn't at the last meeting, but again, Finance Committee was actively involved in this. We'd like to thank them for their help. Adoption of this budget is one of the most important actions this board will take. It establishes the district's direction for the near future, and to some extent, those decisions also have long-term implications. The budget this year is a financial work plan for the district. It translates into expenditures and the use of those funds. Budget summary: the district-wide revenues are projected to be at $8,959,643. The district-wide expenditures are projected to be at $9,216,813,000. Overall, the district-wide expenditures are projected to exceed projected revenues by $257,100. The Finance Committee reviewed and, again, as I indicated, and discussed the budget on August 9th with some recommendations that have been implemented into the final budget. Just brief summary, because I'm sure we're going to the details about this. Sources, let's talk about the fire department briefly. The fire department's revenues are projected to be at $2,224,459, which represents 72.8% of the general fund revenue budget of $3,055,265. The fire department's budget is balanced via a $62,023 transfer from the general fund reserves. Some of the things that the fire department during the budget process indicated that they needed was a USAR equipment, urban and rescue, image trend elite project management equipment of $12,000, Rolex series, and that's not a Zolex series, that's not a watch, $40,000, and command vehicle buildup of $31,000. The next department is the Facilities and Resources Department. The Facilities and Resource Department revenues are projected to be $680,100, which represents 22.3% of the general fund revenues of $3,055,265. Property taxes, which are projected to be $651,330. Just really quick, we talk briefly about the rental fees, which are projected to be $25,000. Again, we're charging everybody something for their use of the Veterans Hall, whether it's a nonprofit organization, and everybody has been very supportive of this. So there is a minimum charge now. That's per direction of the board. The board asked us to try to recoup as much revenue as we can. We want to be sensitive to that because this is a community facility. And so in many instances, though, the use of this facility can range from as little as $100 to up to several $100 depending on the event. That minimum amount covers staff time, if anything's involved, electricity and water. And then we talk about the user funds for that. The department is mainly supported by the administrative cost allocation, which is projected to be $1,859,359 for fiscal year 18-19. And we talk about the sources of funding available to the administrative department. Remember, the administrative department does not generate revenue. It's just a funnel for revenues generated from the other departments. The best way to look at the administrative department is the hub of the organization with the spokes going outward that we support, and also coming inward from sources of revenue from the different departments. The administration department's budget is balanced without a transfer from the general fund and has a projected surplus of $104,600. Parks and recreation, sometimes people get this confused with facilities and resources. Parks and recreation are pros. They have a small budget each year, and it talks about what that funds are going to be used for and the user fund component of that. Going to page 4, the wastewater fund. Fund revenues are projected to be at $2,208,401. and that comes from sales which is projected to be $2,101,901. We are looking at a slight deficit within the wastewater department, and that's $27,722. And if the board approves this, that would be monies transferred from the general fund. Again, we talk about the use of funds for those. Two key infrastructure components that we've budgeted for this year and really severely needed is the influence screen of $164,509. If you recall, last month, the board approved that. And in my general manager's report, the district engineer's sub-report, it indicates where we are in that process and within the terms and conditions associated with the contract when that project's supposed to be done. And the handrails and the digesters, that job is already completed. So we're 1.5 months, almost 2 months into the fiscal year, and the handrail job has been completed. It looks really good, and we were able to actually take about another $4,000 out of some miscellaneous funds under repair and maintenance at the wastewater treatment plant and repair some of the stairs that needed to be repaired on the digester. So the digesters are safe now, and our next big project is the influence screen. The water fund, sources of funds, revenues are projected to be at $2,781,977. Water service sales, which are projected to be $2,425,377. And this will be a good point of discussion for the board. The water fund's budget is balanced and shows a projected surplus of $484,483. Indicated below are some of the significant projects that will be, not projects, but equipment that Jason and the water department have really needed. We have purchased already, and it is on site, and we've actually used it already. Both the different departments have worked on the trailer-mounted vacuum extractor. This is different than the Vector truck that people have talked about. The Vector truck is a large truck that's used to clean sewer lines. This is a trailer-mounted facility that's used to clean out valve canisters and also to help repair leaks. When you have a leak, you want to be able to get to it as soon as possible. So this is going to be really helpful. One thing that I do want to clarify, and we met with President Rice about the dump truck replacement. Although this shows as a capital, and it should show as a capital, within the budget we are financing it as indicated by the board. The Zone 2 and Zone 4 transmission of the San Simeon Creek Road, that $50,000 is not for replacing it. It's for doing the necessary engineering and environmental work associated with that. There are some policy decisions maybe that I'd like to talk to the board about on that. I have some ideas. Water meter replacement upgrade of $50,000. As we indicated earlier, our meters are about 12 years old, and so we're slowly replacing those. And the rodeo ground station upgrade, that's $15,000. That's for electrical components. It is a pretty old system, so we're hoping to make some improvements there. The last item is the Sustainable Water Facility Operating Fund. The source of funds for the Water Sustainability Operating Fund, the revenues are projected to be at $914,000, and the sales are projected to be at $906,000. Represents the biggest funding source of the Water Sustainability Operating Fund. The Water Sustainability Facility Operating Fund budget is balanced via a transfer from reserves, and when it says reserves, it really has not determined what reserves. It could be the Sustainable Water Facility reserves that set aside money, or it could be from general fund reserves, or it could be from extra revenue generated, as we indicated in the budget, from the water department. Expenditures, which include personnel services and supplies, capital outlay and debt services, but not administrative cost allocation, are projected to be $1,064,936. Personal services are projected to be $239,687. Supplies and services are projected to be $130,825. And then capital outlay costs are projected to be $35,000. The debt service costs are projected to be at $659,424, and that's those two payments that Director Farmer indicated. We owe them two payments a year. We did go back, and the reason, in part, that the deficit is large as it is when we brought to the budget, we realized that there was no cost allocation for the sustainable water facility. It was all burdened, if you recall, to the extent of about $900,000, if I recall, to the water department. So we went back and allocated a cost overhead based on the methodology that was discussed and ultimately approved by the Finance Committee. So the cost allocation overhead is $263,815. And this is the last of it, Water Sustainability Facility Capital Fund. The Water Sustainability Facility Capital Fund has no projected revenues. The Water Sustainability Capital Fund budget is balanced via transfer from reserves of $262,938. The Water Sustainability Capital Fund's only projected expenditures are capital outlay costs projected to be the amount of $175,000. And the two items below is the off-hauling facilities. That's the improvement that we're making in the event that we have to run the facility, and costs associated with those. And I have Bob Greshams here. We can answer any questions relating to that. And then that's the Section 7 ESA consultation of $125,000. We incurred this as a cost, even though the purchase order was issued last year. This is Cindy Cleveland. She's our biologist. This is the additional work that she's doing. And the overwhelming majority of the cost and the billing associated this will happen in fiscal year 18-19. So therefore, we didn't think it would be appropriate. We thought it would be appropriate to add this into the cost. One thing that we may want to discuss, and I'm sure it's going to be brought up as we start talking about the budget, is that there is a surplus in the water department fund that could be used to offset the deficit, if you will, for the sustainable water facility. And then one thing we might want to talk about from a budget and from a policy perspective is that remaining set-aside fund that was originally about $1 million. Alan and I are in the process right now of auditing that. We have a fairly high confidence level that it's right around $650,000 or so. But from a policy standpoint, there's another source to draw down on, but we do have to consider future mitigation possibilities relating to the facility. So I know that's a lot to cover. I just didn't want to turn it over to Alan because he would have got up and ran out on me. And so with that, I'll answer any questions the board may have, however you want to do it. So thank you, board.
I'm going to give the floor to Director Pearson, who is the chair of the Finance Committee, in just 1 minute. But the first thing I want to say is Mr. Lavoisier has been a godsend to come in and fix the things that needed to be fixed on top of being in the middle of doing a budget. And I know the demands on your time have been, I'm sure you're dreaming numbers in your head. And I appreciate there's some additional detail that we had not seen before, not just in the budget in June, but in prior years that I really appreciate you brought forward, like the amounts with the county tax, that there's a certain amount that the county retains. That was never obvious before. So little details like that, to me, make a difference and help me when I'm going through and looking at the detail of it to know kind of where everything is coming from. And comparing it to the expenditure reports, it seems to be, with the exception of some in the fire department, there seems to be a pretty good handle on what's going to happen. Now, Mr. Gruber, one of the things that became obvious to me, and you kind of addressed it, and maybe Director Pearson will address it further, is if we've got $400,000 surplus in water, what are we doing a rate increase for? So, and you don't need to answer that right now because I think Director Pearson may have something to say on that, but That's what I'm going to be looking for. I also know that the board last year had requested that we have a budget that's structurally balanced, meaning it's, we're not in the red, and not knowing what the fund balances are right now that's great if we're going to transfer 62,000 from here to there and we put 27 into weight, but I don't know how much we have in that amount to just be pulling out, so I don't know how much we would have left, and I don't know if that information's available, but those are my main concerns, so Director Pearson, it's all you.
Thank you. The Finance Committee did meet, I believe it was the 9th of August, and we would like to thank Finance Director also for a splendid job, and thank you for what you've done. We were not able to look at the budget very much because, as he pointed out at that time, it was kind of a moving target, and so we kind of did not look at the budget that is in front of you in depth, and so we really can't do a recommendation or a not recommendation. We did, with his help, exceptional help, look at the allocation of the administrative costs, and that's why you have different allocations in front of you, is because that's what the Finance Committee basically recommended. That is why the Water Department now has a surplus and the SWF has a deficit, is because we basically reallocated that the way it was, quote unquote, normalized based upon what he recommended and what the board, we made a few changes, but not a lot. And I think it was a good discussion on that and well done. I think at some point in time, we need to look at whether the SWF is in fact part of the water enterprise, and if it is part of the water enterprise, then we would have only 2 enterprise funds instead of 3, and that would kind of solve this allocation instance. Yes, sir.
To that end, I just want to point out one thing. In the audit, there are 2 enterprise funds, as you note. Wastewater, obviously, there's no question about. So SWF certainly is part of the water fund per the audit.
And I think we do have to continue accounting for it separately because of the loan agreement that we have, calls for that, et cetera. But at the same time, it can be part of that same enterprise fund, and we can treat those funds as intermingled in that sense, at least.
Yes.
So that's the report from the Finance Committee, basically.
Okay. Vice President Berenger.
So I think are we going to, is that it? Are we going to now approve something, or are you going to be going and reviewing the budget in more detail?
I'm sure I've spent some time with each board member, really, or at least several of them. There are several questions. I think one of the things that I have in my notes here is, and it was brought up by President Rice, is there seems to be, so we built this budget on data from that was compiled from the previous finance manager, and we use that to catapult into finishing this product. But there is something that I think that was brought to my attention by President Rice, and I think it's a valid point. And this is consistent throughout the document, and we're talking about individual line items as it relates to the budget. So just picture in your mind the different departments, and you'll see a budgeted amount for fiscal year 18-19, and let's say it's $6,000. And you'll see an estimated amount for a line item for the end of fiscal year 17-18, an estimated amount, and it'll be $963. And then you move over to the one column over, and you'll have a budgeted amount, actual budgeted amount for 17-18, and it'll be $6,000. The question was, if you were to take that estimated amount, why did you jump from a relatively small amount to a relatively large amount? Now, in one line item, that they may not seem like a lot of money, but when you're talking general fund money and deficits, if you were to take each line item, sharpen our pencils, go back with staff and meet, there could be significant savings there. The other inconsistency, or not really an inconsistency, but a question was asked and was about salaries. And then you'll see sick leave and you'll see vacation, but they're zeros. Or, how come those are zeros? The methodology used in this budget was we take every employee and we calculate their salary at 2,080 hours. And we don't, whether they take a sick day during that time or an admin day or a vacation day, it's credited towards that 2,080 hours. We don't try to estimate, if you will, how much those employees are going to take off. So again, if you look at the zeros that you're going to see as far as salaries in each one of the departments, it being zero, that's the methodology we used. Now, if at some point in time when we get a more sophisticated financial software in code, or we work with the budget committee or the finance committee and they want a better breakdown, I think that's something we could do in the future. So again, the methodology was 2,080 hours. That's a year of employees. We take their salary. I'm just using a hypothetical number of $60,000, and no matter what time they take off, it's reduced from that. One other thing is, in our audit last year, there's a jumping from the budget to the audit. There's something called compensated absences, and you're required to do this in the budget or as part of an audit. And that is everybody's leave time. If something happened where the district ceased to exist, or it was taken over, or everybody quit and we had to cash out, you have to show that as a liability. And so everybody's leave time combined, their sick leave and everything, district-wide, in the audit shows an amount of $507,104. That's a liability. So it's showed in the audit. We don't show it in here. I would encourage some discussion relating to the reserves for the water fund. There's several variables relating to this, and one of them is the cost allocation. But in utility management, if you will, it's okay to have reserves in these enterprise funds. I think we need to have some reserves, and I think that could be part of a policy. We don't want a large amount of money sitting in these enterprise funds reserves, but a healthy district or a healthy city or a county should have some reserves. And the reason being is for emergencies. An example was the Bluebird Hotel line that broke that cost us about $100,000, but it also cost us a lot of revenue and lost revenue, lost water. And then in the event of a catastrophe, you're going to have a bridge to make some of these repairs until your federal funds can come in. So it's really a policy decision, working with staff on how much reserves you want to have. But remember, on this sheet over here, this one farthest going this way, we're looking at $5.9 million of repairs that need to be done to the water system. And so to say, do we really need the rates? Yes, we do, just for those couple of reasons. And then even if we weren't to transfer this money and to put it over to the SWF, we could use it in its entirety to start an aggressive meter replacement program, which is probably going to cost us, I don't have the exact figure right now, I had a lot of numbers running through my head, but we could take that and use that. Now let's go over to the SWF. The board had a general policy. I'd really like the board to work a little bit more on the specifics of this, and that was that mitigation word. We're going to set $1 million aside for mitigation, whatever that may be. Well, a lot of those funds have been spent on mitigating the impoundment basin. We all know that, and we're down to about unaudited numbers, and I don't want to commit, but about $650,000 somewhere around there. We'll have to get you a better number. But that mitigation number is I would be reluctant to spend that $400,000 on the operational part of the SWF, or even the 200 and something that we need on the capital side, because once we spend that down, the only source of revenue we're going to have from that is our general fund revenue. And we don't know, we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what's going to happen as we move forward with the regular coastal development permit. You know, we go to county, we go to the Board of Supervisors, it gets appealed to the California Coastal Commission. We don't know, if there's any legal challenges associated with that facility in the future. So I would safeguard that money, but I think we need to come up with a policy about safeguarding that money. I think what makes sense is using the excess projected revenues from the water department and balancing the sustainable water facility operational budget with the understanding there's still a deficit in the capital side of things. Now, one more thing, I talked with President Rice, and she asked me, when will this system balance out? I mean, Jerry, we're spending a lot of money on this thing, and what I would remind everyone is when we created our rate structure, we based that rate structure on information that we got from CDM Smith relating to the cost that they thought it would take to run that facility. Well, obviously that was based on operating, how much an operator would cost, how much electricity would cost, how much chemicals would cost, just general components. But a facility like this had never been built before or operated, and so the 800-pound gorilla in the room was the Title 22 and Title 27. So we established rates. We moved forward with those rates. We got the Title 22 and Title 27 permits, and they were so onersome that from day one there was a disparity with regards to revenues versus expenditures. Then came along the impoundment basin, which was very expensive. From a expenditure standpoint, we've reduced the chemical cost. We're looking at alternatives that could reduce the brine disposal cost. So the best way I can describe it, to answer President Rice's question, is when we started this facility, we were about like this. This is expenditures, this is revenues. And we're starting to get closer. And I feel fairly confident within the next few years that we'll continue to get closer in those areas. But I've talked a lot. I just want to hear some feedback from the board on individual pages within the budget. Alan and I and Monique, I think, can answer anything the board will ask of us.
So you're looking for some specific direction on certain items and for approval on the budget in overall. I've got lots of lights on, so I want to.
Well, what I'd like to see just really quick is we have to adopt it because we have to adopt it by September 1st, but you could adopt it and you could tell staff working with the finance committee, Jerry, staff, I want you to go back and those individual line items I referenced before that it was projected to be X, but why are you budgeting Y? Go back and really sharpen our pencil. Try to reduce it even more. I don't necessarily know I'd wait all the way to a mid-year budget to do that. We could come back in a month or two and adopt another budget revised based on the recommendations from the board on sharpening our pencils and the input I've got from you guys. I mean, I think that is it a perfect document? No, it's not. But I think it's a good starting point, and I think there's some work that still needs to be done, to be honest with the board.
Vice President Berenger.
Okay, without getting into each line item, and we do want to adopt this budget, but this budget is stealing the water and wastewater departments is at a deficit, and it is not a balanced budget. Is that correct? We are, in fact, taking money from general funds, even without a rate increase.
Depending on, as far as water as a department, not ignoring
I'm just saying the overall budget, and I'm assuming
yes,
that water,
reserves are needed to balance expenditures.
How much?
Reserves are, of course, not revenue.
Right.
Balance, in the way I define a balanced budget, is your revenue at least matches your expenditures.
Right.
And taking out reserves or getting loans are not revenues by any definition.
Right. So and the fact that we reallocated overhead and to try and more specifically address the true cost of the AWTP, Advanced Water Treatment Plant, and now it looks like we have money in water. As far as an enterprise fund, really, the water is water. Water, you're either making it or you're or you're delivering it. So with that in mind, and we're going to be passing a budget where we're, even without a rate increase and without a capital improvements of any kind, we're still running in the red, and our taxpayers are now paying for what our ratepayers should be paying. So I would recommend, go into the details if you want, but I would recommend that we pass this budget because statutorily we need to, and at the same time, when we address it again, if in the event that the rate increase is not approved, that we seek ways to reduce whatever we have to reduce to not have an imbalanced budget and to not continually subsidize the water and wastewater plant. And revisiting this in 6 weeks or 8 weeks, hopefully we can now allocate some revenues that we will realize to not only eliminate the deficit from the general fund, but to fund much-needed projects that we can from a capital perspective. So that's my summary of where I think we are.
May I
Yes, please.
mention one thing? You mentioned deficit in the general fund. There isn't a deficit in the general fund. It's a small, very small surplus. Some departments, and that's just a matter of allocation, but if you take the one surplus versus the deficit, it's a small surplus based on revenues over expenditures.
Okay,
Minimal.
I understand.
No question.
Director Pearson, followed by Director Farmer.
Yeah, I basically agree with Vice President Berenger that we need to move on. I just have a couple of items that I want to run through here. The first one deals with the next topic on our agenda, I believe, about the loan payoff. And the loan payoff that you've got shows that we're going to get a payment on the 30th of June of this fiscal year. So it ought to show up in our budget somewhere, right?
That's correct. Alan and I had a really lengthy conversation about this yesterday. We're approving something, we're approving a payback mechanism in which we don't have a methodology in which to pay it back, essentially. We're running a $27,000 deficit in the wastewater department, and if the loan, which is another agenda item, is approved, you're correct, Director Pearson. There is not a line item within the budget to pay for that.
Okay, or the other way around either. Over into the, and where would that go? Where's the loan? Well, we'll talk about that later, I guess. I don't want to confuse that at this point in time. It looks to me like in the SWF you have 2 people scheduled for the SWF at this point. The amount you've got for personnel can't be just Mr. Green. There's got to be, have you got other personnel in the SWF budget, personnel?
Well, there's one, the full-time person there, and then the district engineer, his time is spread between the enterprise, because general fund doesn't need an engineer. That's actually how it's been since I know of,
We're showing
the 2000s that I know of has been that way.
We're showing Bob as 25%, and we're showing Melissa as that figure of 159,134 of 35%, I think, or one third.
Okay, so a little bit of both of those people are in that particular fund?
Correct.
Okay, that makes sense. In the Water Operating Department fund, at the bottom under funding resources, there's loan proceeds of $76,000.
That, after, in hindsight, I should have added to the label of that. That is for the dump truck, the $76,000 dump truck.
Okay, got it.
I wish I had labeled it as such. But
Got
yes.
it. Now, I understand that now. Okay, good. That's it for me. That's about the only questions I had.
All right, Director Farmer?
Thank you. So I have a few questions, a few comments. So first off, I appreciate the fact that Vice President Barringer just noted the fact that expenditures are outpacing revenue. Obviously, this is nothing new. It's been happening for a long time. About 5 years ago, the district had $10 million in the bank. Now we have roughly $2 million in the bank. This trend is just kind of an ongoing thing. Recently, we were able to balance the budget because we didn't make any improvements at the wastewater plant, needed infrastructure improvements. I just wanted to add that there. So there should be an ongoing cause for concern. As you say, you can't run a household that way. You certainly can't run a district that way. I wasn't necessarily going to mention this right now, but since it was brought up, as what I'm about to bring up, I was going to mention in the general manager's report, but since it was just discussed, Director Pearson talked about the recent meeting on August 9th of the Finance Committee. And he alluded to the fact, well, they really weren't able to kind of take a look at the budget because we didn't really have the information. I know I'm not going to necessarily make any friends in doing this, but since I was at that meeting and took a few notes, I'd like to just read just some brief quotes from people in attendance. The first one is from Ted Siegler. This was probably about an hour, not quite an hour into the meeting. Ted Siegler being one of the 5 members of the committee. He said, we are, quote, "We are not well prepared," unquote, "to provide paperwork and information to the public in attendance." A little bit later on, Mr. Siegler says, "This morning was basically a waste of 4 people's," meaning the 4 people on the committee. President Rice wasn't available at that time. "This morning was basically a waste of 4 people's time and the public." He then states shortly after, "Not having a package that is relevant to the agenda items is not okay." And then Chairperson Pearson says, "We haven't had participation from staff to get things done." I thought I would mention that. That's what happened at the recent Finance Committee meeting. So now I'd like to move to page 35. First off, I do want to express my gratitude for myself, the other board members, for staff, and for the entire community, the fact that the water fund has a surplus of nearly $500,000. I mean, that's something we can be totally grateful for. You know, obviously, it's a little bit disappointing that we're having to transfer money from the general fund to balance the budget at wastewater. So I'm noticing here that under the uses of funds for wastewater, under expenditure, this is on page 35, at the last paragraph, listed below are the requested capital asset expenditures for $209,509, and this is for supposedly this upcoming fiscal year 18-19 budget. And of course, the 2 items mentioned are the influence screen, which hopefully will be installed by the end of this year for $164,000, and then the improvements on the handrails for digesters, $45,000. So the overall amount, $209K. What it doesn't say is that these 2 items are just for the first 6 months of the coming fiscal year, and that the following 6 months we actually need to make improvements at the wastewater facility, and this is according to the CIP, the Capital Improvements Program, drawn up by our Chief Engineer, Mr. Greshams, of roughly $864,000. These are the improvements that are needed in the second half of this particular fiscal year. Now, this is depending on whether the rate increase takes place, which I personally hope it does, at least, certainly for wastewater. But this is a minor. The fact that the expenditures are here just going to be, like I say, $209,000, that's really kind of, how could we say it, not accurate. That would be, in my humble estimation, an accurate assessment of the situation. I'd like to move on to page, if we don't mind, move on to pages, I'm still at 35, 36, so let me just move down to the bottom here under wastewater sustainability facility operating fund, and this was already alluded to obviously by the general manager. So what we have here is, revenues are projected to be $914,000. So we need to remind folks that these revenues are not from services that are being provided, but once again, from the monies that are being paid from your water bill. That's where the revenue for this facility comes from. So here we have also, as we move over to page 36, and this is also mentioned by our general manager, the water sustainability operating fund budget is balanced via a transfer from reserves of $414,000. And then if you go down just below that to water sustainability facility capital funds, this budget is being balanced, being a transfer from reserves of $262,000. So we are transferring from reserves, which I would like to find out a little bit more about momentarily, transferred from reserves of $650,000. So I'd like to know, number one, what are these reserves that are balancing the budget of these two funds? How much longer are these reserves available? And what happens when they're not available and these monies are still needed? Thank you.
I think there's, the question on that is similar to the one I had about not knowing what the fund balance currently is, because if we're going to transfer money from the fund reserve, and we are going to look at an interfund loan policy for a specific one, and then look at how we're going to approach it going forward. But I tend to agree that not knowing how much money is sitting there, if we're going to transfer $700,000 overall from the reserves, that's not, reserves don't get replaced anyway except money coming in. So not knowing whether we have $1 million or $5 million sitting there in reserves makes it harder for me to know how to approach that. I would suggest that maybe the board might want to consider that that maybe some of the capital outlay be reconsidered under water, and any additional funding first come from the water department rather than the general fund reserves to cover the SWF costs, and that takes a consensus of the board to go in that direction. But it seems like a smart way to go to me, and I'm just one, but I do want to say that balancing the budget out of monies that we have sitting in LAIF or wherever they're sitting, whether it's the money that was set aside for mitigation or not, I think it's not sustainable to continue to budget in this way. And again, this is not a comment from me on the quality of the budget. You came in the middle of the budget process. So this is not even a question maybe even you can answer. I don't even know. But what we're struggling with here is trying to get a handle on these spending things. I think maybe the other direction that we could be providing is when, and I'll need some feedback from the general manager on this, but when it makes sense to me to come back at the budget after we know whether the protest on the rate succeeds or not. Because then we will have a better idea, and then we can address the second half of the year expenditures for wastewater at that time. Because I think that it's smart to not have them included right now, because we don't know if the protest is going to succeed or not. So to not have them in here is a much better way to go. To reduce the expenditures in the water fund so that we can make sure we can cover the expenditures for the SWF also seems like a smart way forward to me, but I would like to hear from directors how that sounds.
I would still like to know where the reserves are coming from. Where the $650,000 in reserves to cover these two funds are coming from.
I come from one of three sources. It would come from the excess revenues within the water department that's projected. It can come from that set-aside mitigation money, the Sustainable Water Facility Fund, or it can come from general fund.
So in the mitigation money, after we spend, I believe it was like $717,000. So after we spend this $650, we're going to have, if my mind serves me correctly, about $65,000 left in that mitigation fund.
If the board takes that direction, I think this is what part of the direction that you're asking for is whether or not to use that mitigation funds. Because I think the question that the staff is asking us, and correct me if I'm wrong, is where do we want that money to come from?
This is like a shell game.
It's accounting. I mean,
cool. Aren't they the same thing? No reflection on you. You're doing a great job. Don't get me wrong. But
it is important for us to give some direction about where the money is going to come from, whether we want to move it from where it's currently.
No, it's important for us to know what the heck is going on here. Well, I don't mean to interrupt you, President Rice, but moving money from one fund to another, while there's a certain elephant in the room that is sucking this money that isn't even running. We're going to take money from a water fund that we need every day. We need water every day. We've got a facility that isn't operating that we're going to take money from a water fund. And we know that we need water. And we know that there's often repairs that need to happen in water. I'm just saying, and if I could do this, and I know I'm interrupting you.
So you're against taking the money from the water fund to cover the costs of the SWF. That's what I hear you saying. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I would certainly consider that reality correct. So if I can also move to one more item in this budget on page 42. Oh, no, wait a minute. I'm still on page 36. So what we have here under the use of funds, expenditures for the facility operating fund, impoundment basin at $35,000. And then under the capital fund, we have use of funds, off-hauling facilities of $50,000. I'd like to know how accurate those figures are. I mean, we are decommissioning the impoundment basin. $35,000, how accurate is that amount of money? Off-hauling the brine for $50,000, how accurate are those monies?
Bringing Bob up, okay? And I can answer it too, so.
Thank you.
Okay, if I heard you correctly, and by all means, let me know if I got this wrong. But the first one was the question on the $35,000 that was in the operating budget for dealing with the impoundment basin. Okay, that was an estimate to haul off the last 18 inches of the water that might remain in the pond after we are closing it. So that was an estimate on hauling cost. Of course, these are all estimates, and they can change. I mean, we made an estimate on the volume being pretty minimal at that point in time, and hauling the water off to the South County Sanitation District facility per our permit. So they have a certain charge, 11 cents per gallon, and there's hauling costs. So we just did our best at estimating that volume and then that cost to haul it. Your second question again, Mr. Farmer, Director Farmer.
The cost for, he just actually got the two confused. He actually just addressed the capital fund, which was the off-hauling down to South County. So I'm also asking about the expenditure for the impoundment basin, okay, which is under the operating fund, and it says $35,000. I seem to recall figures much larger than that with regard to decommissioning the impoundment basin.
Right. We're working with the temporary system we have out there to empty it and dilute the water to go into the perk pond as opposed to hauling. So that's saving the district money by having that closure plan in place. So that's a substantial savings, and some of maybe the earlier numbers you may have heard on that. So that's a really careful operation, so we can just continue to lower that pond elevation using the water board's approved closure plan approach.
So you're telling me that figures that we had heard in the past, which were like six figures and fairly high ones, we're now looking at $35,000? Is that what we're talking about?
Yes, and there are unknowns that can happen if the water quality all of a sudden changed and we couldn't dilute it anymore, then the hauling costs would go up. But so far, our operators are doing a good job of, trying to.
And the regional board worked really hard with our staff, working really hard to find a way that, because they recognized that the costs of closing the impoundment basin were very high, and to find a way that would reduce those six-figure costs. And I think that our staff and the regional board worked well together to reduce those amounts. I don't expect that it's probably going to be exact, but it's probably as good an estimate as we're going to get until we actually get into the hauling.
Okay. So just one more item that I want to address here, and this is on page 42 or page 4 of 4 down at the bottom. And this is regarding the, once again, the Sustainability Water Facility Operating Fund use of funds. So what we have here is the actual fiscal year for 2015 and 16, and then it moves out to the proposed fiscal year for 2018-19. So what happens is the actual for fiscal year 2015-2016, $4,300,000. The actual for the following fiscal year, $267,000. The adopted for 17-18, $90,000 deficit. The estimated fiscal year 2017-2018 is $457,000. To me, I look at these numbers, it looks like the mood swings of a manic depressive on steroids that hit a brick wall. I mean, I don't know how else to describe it. And then, of course, proposed for this fiscal year, zero. Now, I'm not an accountant, and I don't play one on television, but I don't get this. And what does this foretell for the future?
Mr. Gruber, can you address why it says zero on page 42 for the SWF for the budget for 18-19? Or maybe, do you know the answer?
Yeah, and above, it's the 414,000 that is coming from reserves, balances that out to a zero. Okay, so it's not really a balanced budget. It's the 414,000 that's coming from other source of funds is what it's labeled, but I'm sure it's taken from reserve or somewhere else.
Well, it's just interesting how these numbers, as I just noted, have fluctuated to such a degree just in the past 3 years, going on 4. Thank you. I guess that's it.
I would suggest that that one of the things we need to do is set a date when we can come back to look at this after we have the rates, and then Director Pearson maybe has a suggestion.
Yeah. First, I would suggest that we direct the general manager and his staff to be prepared to have a new budget based upon the rates passing or not, available for the October Finance Committee, Standing Finance Committee meeting, okay? Whether that's, more money so that we can do the things that we need to do, or whether that's a very austere budget that is a modification of this so that we have a balanced budget going forward. So that would be one recommendation that I have.
Director Behringer?
Maybe I would go a little bit further. I would suggest that staff, if we pass this budget will be in fact the official budget of the district, and the public should recognize that it's taking money from reserves, and it's it's a balanced budget, but it's not, from a cash perspective, we're continuing to eat into our own reserves. And that staff, as much as possible, could project a budget that could be looked at as early as September as to what the additional, it's one number. This is how many more thousands of dollars we're going to get per month in water and wastewater, assuming that it passes. Because if it doesn't pass in 2 months anyway, we're going to have to look at it again. And in my recommendation is to trim the budget down even more so that we aren't eating into our reserves. So it's kind of like a practice in September. I know that's very, very soon, but the reason I believe that all the information wasn't available for the last Finance Committee meeting is that we were in the throes of having someone trying to put down a budget that was statutorily required for us to pass today. And I think that the public shouldn't think that staff isn't working hard trying to get things done. They worked very hard, and because there was a Finance Committee meeting that people were disappointed they didn't have as much information as they can, perhaps they can now provide a guesstimate, or at least the numbers that we think we can get if in fact the rate study does pass. If the rate study doesn't pass, then the Finance Committee needs to look at a whole different idea.
I think asking them to do that by September is pushing it.
Yeah,
And I'd rather have a better product in October.
Okay, in October. But in October, we'll know whether...
Right.
And the rate study we have those numbers.
They already have
and
the numbers,
I'll
so
sit
they'll
down with
already know
Alan,
that. Yeah.
we have those projected
And
estimates.
this resolution does say that they gives the general manager authority to make a temporary suspension on CCSD to protect the CCSD's financial position, he can temporarily suspend certain things so that we are not going into a bad place. I personally, we do have to pass this. A budget is essentially the authority for the general manager to spend on the things within the areas where, so this is our approval of, this is what the general manager can do, and if he goes outside that, then he has to bring it to us anyway. One of the directions I was hearing was where is the money coming from for the Director Pearson?
I have a suggestion there.
Okay, please.
First of all, because they really are one enterprise fund, the water fund, I would suggest that the overage in the water fund help alleviate the deficit in the SWF fund. And then, as I recall, the one reserve fund that we actually do have some money in, I think it's about $1 million, is the water enterprise fund reserve fund. I think that's got like $1 million. So the remainder, instead of coming from the general fund, I would suggest that we take that excess that we need, okay, from the water.
I don't think that's true.
Is that?
No.
I need to point out, per the audit, so this goes back to June 30th, of course, 2017, almost at 18, I'm sorry.
That's right.
Yeah. There's 57,000 in the water fund. Cash is what the water fund has. Now, that is a combination of a deficit in the water department, the old water fund before SWF, and anything SWF has. But definitely there isn't $1 million left. And as far as, if you look at the water fund, everything at that point in time, they had 257,000 of cash. I want to point out, fund balance has been used, and fund balance is actually the difference between your assets and your liabilities. So you could have a $10 million fund balance if you have, say, a lot of fixed assets and zero cash. So fund balance isn't really I'm not saying it's not an important number, but in terms of getting cash to pay bills, it's not a relevant number. Right. The relevant number, and as is in the expenditure report, is how much cash do we have. Right. Now, you also have to keep in mind we're we're not at the low point of cash. That comes in October before the property taxes start coming in. So if there's about $2 million now, that's going to be, off the top of my head, don't hold me to the figure, 1.6 million, 1.5 million before. So really, that's the total money that you have to work with, regardless of where it's from.
Could I support Director Pearson's concept that that even though the accounting and the public and I would like to make sure that the SWF is looked at in its true costs, and if for some reason the loan agreement requires us to do so, they do it as a subcategory in the water department, and we should have two enterprise funds, a water enterprise fund and a wastewater enterprise fund in the future. I know we have something on the table that people can protest, and they can do that, but in the future it should be a subset of the water department from an enterprise funds perspective, because that's all we can charge for. That's my thought.
Director Pearson, so if you were to make a motion, it would be to have monies that, other than, I think, exclusive of the amount specifically that we collect that has to be paid to the lender, because part of those rates that went in for the SWF, a specific part of it is set to make those payments. So exclusive of that amount, any amount over the 300,000 or so that's there besides the loan comes first from the water fund monies.
Correct.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's
okay.
fine.
So Director Pearson would move such, and I want to make sure that the minutes are reflecting correctly what the motion is. In a second by Vice President Barrett.
No, I'm just saying I would support the concept. I don't think it requires a motion and a second. I think as part of the discussion on adopting Resolution 26, 2018, approving the final CCSD budget for the fiscal year 2018-2019, which I would move to do, part of the discussion is to, in the future, to look at combining the two.
So you're saying, making a suggestion that we look at that when we come back and revisit the budget for this fiscal year?
Yes, but for now, I move that we adopt Resolution 26, 2018, approving the final CCSD budget for the fiscal year 2018-2019.
Okay, we had a motion on the floor first, though. I want to make sure there isn't a second for that motion. Is there a second for the motion that David made?
It was a recommendation.
If you're not comfortable with it, we can pull it back. I just want to make sure that we're clear with staff about the direction.
I think we do need a motion because staff is looking for direction as to where that money should come from. And I think my motion would stand then, that's where that money should come from instead of going to the general reserve fund and trying to take all that money out of there.
And I would second that particular motion, and then we can take a vote and see where we are with the board majority on that particular item.
Then I'll be prepared.
So, Ms. Madrid, would you read the motion so that we're clear on what we're going to vote on?
Move to adopt the final budget for fiscal year 2018.
Nope, that's not that one. The one for the one that Director Pearson made about any monies.
I'm sorry, I interrupted her, and so could we
any monies coming from the
Yeah.
Go ahead.
The deficits in the Sustainable Water Fund, would be covered by the
money in the water fund.
Excess money in the water fund first, and then going into the reserve funds.
And
No, just reserve reserves. General fund reserves.
and seconded by me, President Rice.
Okay, but it's not to adopt the budget. Is
Not
that
yet.
correct?
That'll be the next one.
Okay, so the motion is to provide direction to staff to cover the deficit in the SWF with water fund surplus first and then general fund reserves.
Yes. So let's have a roll call vote on that. And directors should vote whichever way they think that we should be doing this. I obviously recommend that we do it this way, but let's see what the vote is.
Director Pearson?
Aye.
President Rice?
Aye.
Director Wharton?
Aye.
Director Farmer?
No.
Vice President Berenger?
Aye.
The motion passes 4-1.
Okay, then if you don't mind,
I don't mind at all.
I move that we adopt Resolution 26, 2018, approving the final CCSD budget for fiscal year 2018-2019.
I second the motion.
So it's been moved by Vice President Berenger and seconded by Director Pearson. I just want to point out in the resolution that if you do, General Manager Gruber, if you do need to suspend the budget for some reason to protect the funding, that you're supposed to be reporting back to the board right away if such an event should occur. So I just
Yes,
want to
ma'am.
point that out.
Matter of fact, I'm outside of this conversation, or really inside this conversation, is I think there needs to be some pretty aggressive things done immediately, and I'll keep the board informed on that, and I'll work with my staff on. I don't think status quo is going to continue to get us to where we need to be, so
Great.
I'll let you know about those ideas. So,
Well, is there any further discussion before we take a vote?
I think it
Director Wharton.
I think it just goes along with what has been generally talked about, and I just want to make sure that I'm clear on the issues. We're going to adopt the budget, and pending what the rates come out to be. So, just like looking at the fire department funds, they had the deficit of, $62,000 transfer, but they have about $86,000 in expenditures. Well, if we pass this budget, they're not going to be like, woohoo, we're cashing this check and we're going to buy these things. Or that's going to be suspended until we figure out what the rates are going to be. All right. So they're not going to be going out and buying the USAR, the trend. Okay. We're authorizing that? Okay. Because that's about a third of the entire deficit of the...
Madam President, but I also think that each department, their expenditures, that I need to sit down and look at those and see if they're absolutely necessary.
So these items may not have to be purchased tomorrow. These can be held off until maybe after the rates, after tax funds come in the December, January, I believe, and such. So, these items aren't life or death to this department and other departments too that have some expenditures that they're going through.
I agree. I think the theme is, we'll adopt the budget, but there needs to be some hard discussions with my department managers to say,
makes me feel better. Thank you.
Do we really need to have these things right now?
So when it comes back, we will probably see some changes in that. And again, I do want to acknowledge the fact that doing a budget starts in February or January, and Mr. Labossiere has been here since July, so he did a heck of a lot of catch-up between, in the last 8 weeks or so. So that's one of the reasons we're kind of in a shifty, besides the fact that we don't know whether the rates are going to pass. Hopefully they do, but we don't know. So does that help?
Yeah, it does. It's a very unique situation with everything that's come together.
Correct.
Kind of
like everything in Cambria.
Perfect storm. So, yeah. Thank you for the clarification.
All right.
President Rice and General Manager Gruber.
Further discussion, otherwise we're going to take a vote. All right, let's have a roll call, please.
Vice President Berenger?
Aye.
Director Pearson?
Aye.
Director Wharton?
Aye.
Director Farmer?
Abstain.
President Rice?
Aye. The motion passes 4-0-1. One abstention by Director Farmer. And we are going to take a 5-minute break. Is that all right? Can we take a 5-minute break? All right. The next item on the agenda of regular business is discussion and consideration of approval of an interfund loan. Mr. Gruber.
Thank you, Madam President. That is 6A, discussion and consideration of approval of an interfund loan agreement and provide direction regarding policy for future interfund loans. The fiscal impact for the proposed interfund loan agreement will provide for a loan from the general fund to the wastewater fund in the amount of $466,000. And the proposed terms of the interfund loan will be for 10 years, a period, at the compound interest rate of 4% annually. We have a brief background here based on the audit from the 2015-16 fiscal year. The wastewater fund had a shortfall of $466,000. I think you recall that. This was largely the result of unanticipated, unnecessary repairs at the wastewater treatment plant and to address deficiencies in the district's wastewater infrastructure system, which included emergency repairs that came up during the fiscal year. If you recall, in order to meet that shortfall, we transferred money from the general fund to the wastewater fund. The board's been talking about this for a couple months, and I'm glad you're addressing it now. If you recall, you gave staff direction to bring this back to you and to come up with a mechanism in which to pay that back. We've done that. On page 67 of your agenda, you'll see an interfund loan agreement with the recitals, terms of the agreement, and then on page 69, you'll see an actuarial of Exhibit A. It's called the repayment schedule. Again, as Madam President indicated, June 30th of 2019, payment will be made, and then it is amortized over a 10-year period for a total amount of payment back to the general fund. So with that, Alan and I will be more than happy to answer any questions that the board may have.
Director Pearson?
I have a couple of questions.
And then we'll take public comment after you have your questions.
First, where does the repayment money go? Does it go to the reserve fund or does it go into the general fund?
Well, those are two different things. The general fund is everything, be it the fixed assets, cash, as well as the liabilities,
right,
et cetera. Whereas reserve funds, at least in the way I think of it, is cash. There's two sections of cash, your operating cash, your reserve cash.
Right. Okay, so is this going to go into the operating cash or the reserve cash?
Reserve cash. It's reserve cash until it's needed for operating,
okay,
basically. Yeah.
Okay, but that's where it came from, was the reserve cash, so that's where it ought to go back to.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. One. Two, the audit pointed out that the water fund also has a loan outstanding of $157,726. Are we going to have another loan agreement come before us next month to cover that one? Or
is that the Army Corps 157 or is it a different amount?
That memory, if my memory serves, yes, that's the ACE.
I thought the board had already forgiven that or something, but I don't know.
Recall.
Yeah, I know because you haven't been here, so okay.
Oh, yeah, I was here when it was set up, but I don't remember when I was here if it was forgiven, paid back, or anything.
I was here, and I don't.
Yeah.
All right, so maybe there's some research that needs to be done as far as where that stands, because the audit clearly said that loan is still outstanding. So we need to clear that up before the next audit. And by the way, is our auditor on board for this year already? Is he working? Is he looking at the funds, et cetera?
Actually, he still has to do a few cleanup things for last year's audit. And he mentioned very minor, do petty cash count is about it. And he wanted to come out and start work in October. As far as that goes, I won't be here at that time, but I'm working, and it's a balancing act. I'm trying to clean up last year, and cleanup isn't necessarily the right term. There are some things you have to do at the year end, no matter how much has been done during the year. As far as that goes, just things, the payroll accrual is a good example. That takes, it's about a 75 line entry. You have to reverse last year, do this year's, et cetera, after computing it, and that. But he is on board in terms of wanting to start and finish earlier than last year, if that answers you.
Okay, thank you. I thought that the rate documents showed that this loan was going to be paid back in 5 years, not 10. And that would be my recommendation, is that this loan gets paid back in 5 years, not 10. And I think 4% is a little bit stiff, and I would recommend that it be either 1% or 2%, but no more than 2%. Thank you.
I think that that's eligible for discussion, but before I forget it, if in fact there was $157,726 in the water fund that was owed, that we don't burden the staff with that issue now, but the next time I think that each time at the end of a fiscal year, if we are in fact using general funds to support either the wastewater or water treatment plant, that we include that $157,000. I remember making that payment or authorizing that payment, and it was to ACE, and it was for the environmental work that was being done. Mm-hmm. In fact, the genesis of all of the things they looked at in order to build the EWS, and so we shouldn't forget about that. And I think that it was an error in the past when the district was flush with cash, and they spent a lot of money from the general fund to support things, and especially in support of the enterprise funds and not raising rates. And I think that's a mistake that should not be continued or replicated. So, and if we have
public
comment, I'd like to hear that before I make any recommendations.
I don't have any specific questions on this interfund loan. There's some policy issues that we'll be discussing after we. Don Howell. Just one.
There we are. I think I might have missed something, so my comments may actually be referring to what you're going to talk about next. I'm not talking specifically about the loan you're referring to, although I would say it's kind of late in the game to be playing catch-up on that one. The deed is done, and what we're trying to do now is make it clear to everybody what happened. But more to the point, this situation, these policies, and I've read them, they're all very interesting and certainly worthy of discussion. But I think this may be an opportunity for the board to, again, utilize the Finance Committee in a way that may encourage the public and give them some trust. Consider what might have happened differently had the rate study been passed to the Finance Committee in time for them to actually examine it thoroughly, come up with a position paper to return to the board. Then the public would have known it had been thoroughly discussed. Now this is another opportunity. So I highly recommend that the policies that the manager has put forth for you in the packet be passed to the Finance Committee with a request for them to return with a report and a policy that they would recommend at some future date fixed. It has a couple of effects. One thing, clearly, it gets thoroughly discussed by more than just you folks and whoever here is in the room, and gives other people a chance to give some input. That's one thing. Perhaps equally important is that it saves the board's valuable time. You only ideally have 4 hours a month in which to deal with many issues besides this one. This is a specific issue that could be dealt with outside of a meeting, and a recommendation by a Brown Act committee could be brought to you. So I highly recommend that you go in that regard and don't spend a lot of time twiddling with words or trying to decide where something's going to come from until the Finance Committee has had a chance to review it, and that the public will give you yet additional input. I highly recommend it. I mean, the public wants to trust you, or you, the board. It's not just you guys, the board. So I think they should be given the opportunity. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you for your comments. we do have one of the reasons why we have these sample policies in here from the general manager for this item is because we have this one loan that we've been asking for this to be brought back for a long time. But we also should put something in place, and I don't think what eventually gets put into place necessarily has to be what we do on this particular one, because it's from a few fiscal years back. So, this is what my thinking on this was. I was very glad to have the sample policies in here so that we could kind of see the level of complication, so to speak, that's involved. Oh, I guess my time's up. But also so that I think this should be referred to the finance committee with a directive to come back with some explanation of what these options might be for the board to make the final decision, because I don't want the finance committee to make the decision, but I do want them to go through and, well, we want this one, we don't want this one. The reason we want this one is, so one of the terms of almost every single one of these policies in here suggests that the amount that gets loaned, that it's loaned at whatever the opportunity cost is to gain interest from the other fund that we're loaning from. And I don't think we're making 4% interest, are we, on LAIF? It's not at 4, isn't it like at 0.75%?
It recently has, I hesitate to use the word jumped. Relative to what it was, it jumped. It's about at 1.94 now.
Okay.
Well, and it might be 1.97,
I don't want to be
let's say
changing
2% for the sake of discussion.
Yeah. Okay, for sake of discussion. I don't want to be changing it during the life of the loan, but I tend to agree 5 years is enough, and reducing the interest to 2%. If that's what it would be making in LAIF, I think that's reasonable. I think 4%, that's what we're paying on that. 4.11% is what we're paying on the loan for the facility. Why would we charge ourselves? I mean, going forward, we might want to make the percentage high so to discourage these kinds of loans. But on this particular one, I think because we're correcting a prior issue that has needed correction for a while, that having the 2% on this, we can look at having a higher percentage on future ones, but because we're not going to pass a complete policy today, I don't think.
Well, yeah, I agree. I tend to think that the policy should be a subsequent, maybe the finance committee or somebody else can come through and come with one of theirs. There's some excellent examples. I also think, there's two things. There's the opportunity cost. In other words, we're losing 2% because we don't have the cash in the bank. On the other hand, we're paying 4% because we used the cash that was there to put a down payment, so to speak, on that loan. So why shouldn't we recoup the same amount, the 4%, that somebody else charged us? Now, all we're doing, and it is a shell game, and you want to make sure that the shell doesn't have a mirror under it. But essentially, what we're doing is we're saying you can't just continue to fund the operations of the water and wastewater department by using taxpayers' funds, taxpayers' monies, and the fire department's monies, et cetera. So I like the idea of 5 years instead of 4. It's a very quick thing. They can do it in an Excel spreadsheet, and I would support 2% for this particular fund. But I think there's rationale why we could go 4. But I'll support both of those items, a 5-year payback and 2%.
Other discussion? Director Farmer?
Yeah, if we're actually going to vote on this motion today, I would follow up on what Chairperson of the Finance Committee, Pearson, said, and our Vice President, and approve a 5-year loan at 2% interest.
So it sounds like, would you like to make a motion to that effect?
Would I like to make the motion on a financial matter? Sure. I make a motion that we approve this loan at a 5-year rate of 2% interest.
I second that.
Moved by Director Farmer, seconded by Director Pearson. Would you please read the motion back so we're clear before we vote? Is there any further discussion before we take a vote? Okay, then let's have you read it, and then we'll take the roll call.
It was moved to approve the loan with a 5-year repayment period at 2%.
Thank you.
As part of the discussion, I want to emphasize the fact that $157,000 might be included in any future deficit that we address to help repay the funding for ACE. That's just part of the discussion. It can be in the minutes.
Thank you.
So you want me to note that in the minutes?
Please.
Okay. Director Farmer,
Yes.
Director Pearson,
Yes.
Director Wharton,
Yes.
Vice President Berenger,
I really want to abstain, but yes.
President Rice.
Yes. So that motion passes 5-0. And further direction, I think it's important that we refer this to the Finance Committee to bring back. Mr. Carmel, should we make a motion to that effect, or just giving direction to the committee to do this? What's the best way to approach?
This is the next item on the agenda. 6B,
The same
right?
item on the agenda, but about the policy for the interfund loans.
No, that's 6B.
But
6B is the staff's recommendation on a policy.
right, but that's a policy for policy. We need to refer the interfund loan policy to the Finance Committee still.
Oh, okay.
That's what I'm talking about, is referring the interfund loan policy to the Finance Committee.
Thank you.
Motions provide great clarity, so that would be preferred.
So I move that we refer the interfund loan policy to the Finance Committee to bring back to the board by the November meeting, Chair?
How about January?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Whatever.
So is there a second?
Second.
So it's been moved by President Rice, seconded by Director Pearson, to refer to the Finance Committee the policy of interfund loans and what we will do going forward on other ones.
As part of the discussion, I think that
Yes.
the Finance Committee has a heck of a lot on their plate, and for them to come up with a policy that won't be in effect for another 6 months, or at least that we don't do a date certain like November. We make it prior to the next budget
Are
approval
you saying
or
that
something
because
like
you're
that.
not running for office?
No, I'm saying that because
You're right. You're right. It
because
is
the
a good
staff- yeah.
It is a good rationale. I didn't mean to undermine your good
So I
reason.
refer it to I would support referring it to the Finance Committee to come up with a policy, but putting a timeline on it. They should determine what their work level is, and staff should be able to determine what their work
I don't have
level
a
is to
problem
support
with
it.
that.
That's good.
Okay, so the motion is to refer the interfund loan policy for consideration to the Finance Committee, period, no date certain.
Okay.
And that's acceptable to the seconder. Okay. Discussion before we take a vote? Okay, then let's have a roll call, please.
President Rice,
Aye.
Director Berenger,
Aye.
Director Pearson,
Aye.
I don't think I
Director
second
Wharton,
Aye.
Director Farmer.
Aye.
Thank you. That motion passes 5-0. Finance Committee gets to have some fun with interfund loan policy creation. All right. Item 6B.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm going to introduce this and turn it over to District Council Tim Carmel. Item 6B is discussion and consideration to adopt policy B 02-18.
Madam President, members of the board, this is a policy that establishes a process to create policies. It's
Stop laughing over there, staff.
It's very straightforward. Any director and the general manager can establish a policy. They submit the written policy to the president, the vice president, and the general manager. It's then agendized to the next regular meeting, and that's it. There we go.
So in an example of what, if we were to enact this policy, it would be Director Wharton says, I want to see this policy passed by the board. He gives a copy to the president and the vice president, which at the moment is Director Berenger and I, and the general manager, who then put it on the very next agenda.
It says on the agenda of the next appropriate regular meeting. So there is some
Appropriate.
some
Okay, that's the
flexibility.
flexibility that I was kind of hoping for, because we want to manage the workload. I mean, I could come up with probably 30 policies, and you don't want to be having to, workload-wise. I mean, I wouldn't, because workload-wise, I recognize that's silly, but, all right, I don't have any public speaker slips. I would take any discussion or questions, or Vice President Barron?
Yes, as part of the policy of policies, I think it's a good idea, because what this will do is it'll reduce the amount of individual directors directing the general manager to do something. It's a nice policy, but yet it allows a director to do something.
Right.
And get something on an agenda if it's really important. So I like both sides of the policy. I would recommend that such policy interjection is not abused. By that I mean a director might suggest a policy for a given meeting, but not a set of 30 or something like that. There's just a general person's agreement that this is for a policy that seems to be urgent and needed, and it's a good vehicle to make it happen. So that's just the discussion I have on it, and I would support it under that understanding.
I have a question, though. If the director is giving, like if it's the example that I stated, where Director Wharton is giving it to 2 board members, does that cause a Brown Act problem?
No, you're not trying to develop a collective consensus. You're just looking at the policy and then bringing it to the board.
I see. Okay, and it's the collective consensus building. That's the problem, and not the, okay. So thank you, that's helpful. And my reluctance I also think that it's a good idea. My reluctance is more to do with not having any idea what our set of policies actually is before we jump into coming forward with policies. But since we don't really have that collection of policies assessed anyway, I guess the ones that come forward are ones that will be needed based on what's happening with the district at the time, which is kind of doing things as it comes up, which is not my favorite way to do things. I'd much rather have an idea of what policies we have in place and what we need, but this is a step in the right direction, I think.
Right, and I think the understanding is that when the board of directors is going to adopt a new policy or amend an existing policy, the director that's trying to adopt or amend a policy would need to go through the due process to find out what policy already exists, what they don't like about it, and probably even, and like it was said in your analysis, they actually present what they think the policy should be.
I see.
And then it goes to the general manager and
okay,
it gets agreed on.
All right, I would entertain a motion.
I move that we pass on this issue. Yeah, I would move that. Actually, I don't want to. Adopting a policy on policy is silly. I think we should. I would. Well, I would say that this is something that is. No, that's right. You might have a director that really wants to do something, and you also want to keep people from going directly to the general manager and bugging them. So I would move that we adopt policy number B0218.
I will second.
So it's been moved by Vice President Berenger, seconded by Director Wharton. Is there further discussion before we take a vote? Then let's have a roll call vote, please.
Vice President Berenger?
Aye.
Director Wharton?
Aye.
Director Pearson?
Aye.
Director Farmer?
Aye.
President Rice?
Aye. That motion passes 5-0. We have, next up is the board member committee and liaison reports.
I have just a brief comment there. Mr. Perry once again brought up the idea of more weed abatement and that kind of thing, and I was remiss at the last Fire Safe Focus meeting that I did not bring that up, but I will bring it up this time. And I will get their input as to how they think we could address that, because that's a good group to address that. So thank you for bringing that up again, sir.
Director Berenger.
Yes, I wanted to take this opportunity of reporting on the Infrastructure Committee meeting, and I will certainly entertain Director Farmer to elucidate more on what occurred there. But what I wanted to do is, at that meeting, it was clear that there's continued effort by the general public, committee members, to direct staff on what to do. And I've spent some time thinking about it, and maybe AGP, if you could prepare to pull up that thing for me, I do that. But first of all, I realize that many people in this town, or many people haven't really been in an employer-employee relationship. They might be artists or authors or whatever, and they might have difficulty understanding the delicate relationship in employees. And I can tell a couple of stories, and I'd like people to be introspective if they can. Let's say you were teaching, you're a professor and you're teaching economics, and you teach on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And the students want to they like you, they want you to teach science on Tuesday evenings. Well, that creates a conundrum. You're working for the students, really, but you're an economics professor, and then all of a sudden, the dean of science comes up and says, "Oh, I want you to teach Thursday nights or Tuesday nights." Well, it creates a problem where you have your constituents, with your students, you have your employer. Now you have a different dean from a different college directing your activities. Here's another one. You sell pumps, and you're selling for a major firm, and the new president of the company comes in and says, "Well, I'd like the Western Regional salesman to report to all 5 regions. So each regional manager, you have to do what each regional manager wants you to do." And that would create a problem. And not only that, the Eastern Regional Manager wants you to also sell lawnmowers. It creates a problem. You don't have anything. Here's another one. You have your own company. And you have some constituents go to your marketing department, and they want to change the website. Well, your constituents, your customers are going to your marketing department directly to make changes to your website. Well, it creates a problem because you're just in the process of having a large print campaign, and you don't want your marketing department changing the website now because it's a print campaign they're working on. So under that guidance, when we're looking at this public agency policy that we adopted last month, and by the way, this is the way the world works, is that it's clear that the constituents are up there and they elect a board, and if they go to one board member and that one board member goes to the general manager gets confused. It has to be the board policy as a whole that directs the general manager. And one person said, "Oh, that puts too much power in that general manager." Well, not only that, it's the law. It's compliance with state and federal law. And if we don't like it, I don't like it that much, but it's the law. And if the governor would be a good person to petition, or maybe the legislature. But we're just complying with state law in this direction. And then you have the staff down there. And if the staff gets an email from a constituent that wants an analysis, the constituent doesn't know that that particular staff member might have 5 other things or 10 other things that they need to do. They might be working on a draft issue. There's almost no end to the amount of things that they might have. So the reason the general manager is the gatekeeper is he knows what his employees are doing, what they can or can't do. I would like to see as a policy, or a statement at least from the general manager or from this board, that supports the fact that individual staff members in this district will not respond directly to a constituent's request, be expected to respond directly from a constituent's request, because the constituent doesn't know what the workload level is or the expertise or other things that are on their plate. So I kind of wanted to bring that up as coming from the last infrastructure committee that we need to thoroughly abide by compliance with federal and state law and the policy that we just adopted last month. And I'd be interested in any comments or issues that other board members think.
Well, I think it speaks to the critical importance of the person who is the gatekeeper, as you said, to know what's happening with the staff and to be able to also say no when it's an individual director that isn't backed by previously passed policy or board goals that a board majority has agreed with. But it does speak to the critical importance of communication also, because it's about the gatekeeper being able to know what's happening and managing the staff and communicating to staff that it's okay to tell them, don't tell them no, say you need to address that with the general manager and redirect them. The critical importance of the communication between the gatekeeper and the constituents is part of our job, and that's where it gets a little bit crazy sometimes, because as individuals we don't have any authority to direct the general manager to do anything unless it's already been approved by the board, unless it's consistent with board or district policy. If it's consistent with board or district policy and it requires resources, it still needs to be a majority of the board who approves it. And part of the reason why it's set up like that is so that the district can run in an efficient way that doesn't make people tear their hair out because they've got 18 different directions to be going in. And I don't want to make it, the word gatekeeper is to me not the best way to put it too, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to rely on a person who is responsible for the resources, whether they're human resources or fiscal resources, to make sure that what's happening is we're getting the right things done based on what the board's policy and the district policy is. That's the way I see it.
I withdraw the word gatekeeper, and it reminds me when I was driving through McDonald's yesterday, and I was watching the person that was taking my money, and behind her was a chart, and it talked about how the customer is right, and it takes a lot of training. And it takes a lot of training because the person that's getting the request from anybody should be able to address it by saying, I'm not going to do it. You know, it takes a lot of training. It takes a lot of finesse to be able to come off and say that I'll check with the general managers to see if this can be put on the schedule or if this is something that we should be doing or whatever, and make sure the communication is open. I'm not trying to stifle it as much as I'm trying to allow people to understand that there are so many complex things that go on, whether you're teaching or whether you're selling or whether you have your company or whether, or if you haven't had an employee relationship, if you haven't been involved in that very much, you don't realize how destructive it is to have multiple bosses. It just doesn't work in any situation. So I'm just looking for people to understand that we might have leaks in the system, and we're trying to find these leaks in the system. We're not trying to hide anything. There's no conspiracy. We're not trying to. What we know is we need to change the meters, and we need to get budget to change the meters so we can accurately determine how much loss we have. So there needs to be more confidence in. We're not ignorant, but that we are trying to address these issues, and maybe it's just by approving a budget or a rate structure that can support us doing a better job.
And I think staff people who interact directly with the public are coming from a place of wanting to be helpful to the public and knowing that they serve the public, and it puts them in an awkward position. I also think that the public, when they are talking to staff, I think that they are coming from a genuine place of wanting to help the district work better. And so understanding that helping make the district work better is recognizing that their particular interest in helping the district be better isn't necessarily the one that needs to be prioritized.
Would you support this particular graphic being on the website? Or is it not helpful? Or?
Why don't you bring it forward as a policy under our policy?
Thank you, AGP. I don't need that up anymore. I appreciate it. Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you. Is that your report?
That's my. I think Director Farmer has some more. Might have more information.
Did you have anything from NCAC this month?
No, nothing particular. Bruce Gibson is against Proposition 6, I guess, which is the elimination of the gas tax that's going up there. Yeah, that was probably the major issue. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Director Farmer.
Well, since Chairperson Behringer, Chairperson of the Infrastructure Committee, just alluded to me to maybe follow up on what he said, I need to be if I could add anything to it. Let me just say this much. I didn't come prepared to do that. I didn't bring any notes on that. But if other people, we have our vice chair and another member of the committee who takes really good notes, Karen Dean and Mike Lyons, are out there in the audience. So if they'd like to add something to what you said, I'd ask them to come up to the podium. But I'm afraid I don't have anything to add at this moment.
And don't misunderstand me. I was thinking there was some business that was done. I thought that you might elaborate that, not on my little diatribe or my statement. I was just thinking and if anybody has something to add on the business that went on there, okay, seeing none, I'm done.
So I'll make a report first from the Forest Committee, and because of the fact that our meetings have run over and that type of thing, I don't believe that I've made any reports from the Forest Committee for probably 2 or 3 months. I'm going to make this as brief as possible. First off, I had this right in front of me. In June, we had a presentation from Matthew Ritter. He's a biology professor at Cal Poly, and he's a world-recognized expert on California plants and trees. We had a full house. There wasn't an empty seat in the place. It was obviously very well attended. People bought a number of his books while they were there. I'll just briefly comment on a couple of things that he mentioned about the value of woodlands, about all of nature, but especially the woodlands, how beautiful the woodlands are in the state of California. We're in a very special place where the oldest and tallest trees in the world exist, the redwoods, which has us standing out just in the case of that. We have a large number, more than in any other places, with regard to rare species of plants. He also mentioned the fact that agriculture and urban sprawl are the major harm to the rare species in our state, and that 30% of the species in California are considered rare. So that's how problematic things have become. Now, the Monterey pine, believe it or not, are the second rarest pine species in the state of California. There's only 5 stands of them. We're blessed to have one of them right here in Cambria. Now, he also talked about, I had one more item here that I want to mention with regard to what is threatening to these species. Also, threats are road maintenance, invasive grasses, and grazing. This has done a lot of harm to the woodlands in the state of California. But he also talked about, and this is something that's certainly pertinent to Cambria, the loss and lack of fog drip is a threat to the survival of the pines here in Cambria, as well as the redwoods and all variety of trees similar to these throughout the state of California, especially the ones close to the coast. So I just mentioned that. One other item that was discussed at the August meeting was a concern about weed abatement guidelines that were sent out by the CCSD, and it was felt by the Swartzes that the guidelines are not necessarily appropriate because a number of parcels were removed by Chief Hollingsworth, and including some at the core area of Fern Canyon, and some of the parcels in Fern Canyon have never been cleared. So that's something of their concern. I also want to mention that with regard to the Forest Management Plan, which is one of the important items, with regard to the Forest Committee, they're hoping to have a presentation by Rick Hawley, the former executive director of Green Space, to do a presentation on forest management here in Cambria, hopefully in October. And if you'd like to know more about the Forest Management Plan, you can go to the Forest Committee website and they can fill you in on that. With regard to the Friends of the Fiscalini Ranch Preserve, once again, haven't reported on them in a while. I'll make this as brief as possible. The recent kitchen tour was very successful. They had educational tables at the kitchen tour with regard to the Fiscalini Ranch. Very successful. The tour made $17,000, $1,000 more than the previous year. There was also a very successful FFRP, a tour of the ranch on Sunday, April 12th, and it was mainly addressed to the Spanish language community. It was also very successful. That's a very cool thing. One of the concerns with regard to the benches out on the ranch, maintenance, improvement, and replacement of wooden benches, as well as the slabs under some of these benches, it looks like they're going to be problematic in the near future, if I understood things correctly. And also, there's a possibility of investigating purchasing a lot on Warren Road adjacent to Tipton to provide for ranch parking in that area. Chipping, a lot of chipping is being done. If you go up to the ranch right now, some of the trails are like closed off or were last week to do chipping, and all this chipping is being passed over to trail improvement. The boundary survey, I couldn't understand whether it was done or it's still ongoing. It's slightly over cost, and this is something that is concerned not just to FFRP, but to the CCSD. There are certain encroachments that are taking place by property owners, especially along Huntington, some on Warren, but more so larger issues on the ranch side, the Huntington side of the ranch, some innocent and some purposeful. And so the question was, how aggressive does the FFRP and the CCSD want to be in addressing these? So that's it. Thank you.
Sounds like that last one could be a future agenda item for the board here, maybe, possibly. How aggressive we would
Well, I
want to
think
be
that
on
probably depends on, let's say, the future discussion they have at FFRP. Right.
Okay. Thank you. I think that we're good with the board reports. General Manager Gruber?
Yeah, for the purpose
Did you have
of,
something else, Vice President Farragut?
Just real quickly, this tourism board helped sponsor 80 cars that were coming down Highway 1. There was 80, an armada, one car representing each year that the highway has been here. There was 50 journalists involved, and they stayed in Morro Bay for one night, and then a group of them stayed here in Cambria, and it was very successful as far as reopening of the highway. And they're filling the pool. So.
Thank you.
Madam President, the board attached is my general manager's report. If there's any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them at this time instead of me going through it. I just field any questions.
I just have one question. Did you meet with the county planning department this month on the regular meeting?
Briefly, we had a brief telephone conversation with them, but
And how are we progressing on our permitting?
we
issues?
still, Cindy Cleveland's doing her work out there on the consultation. Were you in on that conference call, Tim? Or you want to? I wasn't. You want to brief me on that, or?
Thank you, Mr.
There you
Carmel.
go.
It was a fairly brief phone call. Essentially, we're waiting for at least the bulk of Cindy's work before we're going to commence serious discussions again. The issues are central to most of this stuff, so we sort of decided at this point not to have monthly meetings until we have something back from her.
So they're on hold until Cindy's report comes through.
But the Coastal Commission biologist and our biologist, and we'll be meeting out there too. So those two are coming together, which I think is important for the ESHA issue.
Good, because getting that permit is an operational thing, which means that it's part of your job, but getting that permit has been a goal of this district for a long time, and we need to complete that process. So I just wanted to get an update on the record for the public that how that's going. Thank you.
Yeah.
Director Wharton?
I just wanted to point out that the and Director Farmer was in the office, as I understand, too, with the remodeling of the office, and I think Director or Vice President Beringer has been in there as well. The expenditure report listed, $4,000 as a down payment on an installation. That is not just getting the furniture delivered and dropped off and walked away. This is included used furniture, from what I understand. So this wasn't a brand new furniture. So we're doing our best to save our money on that route. Correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. So
and we're surplusing when appropriate any old furniture.
Yeah. So we bought some excess furniture off of Cal Poly. Was that correct, Monique?
Microphone.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I just wanted to point that out
because I think some of those
because
desks are probably from when the district was formed.
Right. So I know that there was some discussion on several of the forums online, et cetera, but I just wanted to clarify that. I walked into the office today. I saw several walls walled off, windows walled off, and a lot of good work taking place. The fact that it's going to save us $12,000 over a year in the rent reduction will pay for itself, almost immediately. So.
You mean Mexico isn't paying for the walls?
We paid for the wall.
Director Pearson.
A couple of questions. Your report mentioned that Tyler Encode is on hold right now. Can we get?
Well, yeah.
Where are we at? And when do we
we've been in dialogue with them, and we feel that we have selected we've extended a conditional employment offer to a really good finance person. And when she comes on board, October, once she passes all the background, I'll let the board know who it is and stuff. It's a little premature to release a name, but she'll be on board October 10th, and then we're going to jump into it at that point in time. So with the transition with new finance managers and everything, we thought it would be a good idea is to hold off for a little while. Tyler Incourt's receptive to that. Alan's been in contact with him, so has Monique. Alan, do you want to add anything about that to Tyler Incourt, or? No. Yeah, we want to get that up and going as soon as possible. I mean, I think it's going to address
a lot of issues.
I agree. It really is.
I agree. I'd really like to see that.
And the one thing that
back up again.
The new finance manager is going. She has experience in moms, although it's been several years. But I think that's important too in the transitioning from our existing software into a new financial software. So, yes.
Okay. I saw an email about the water rights that you sent. Have you gotten any reply to that? Other than he'll certainly have it done by December.
No, but I do need to follow up with him, and I'll do that and send an email out to the board on the first part of the week. Not a problem.
Okay. And my last thing is, we were kind of promised a vehicle inventory for this meeting,
Yes,
but I didn't see that, so could you
apologize.
please try to get that in September?
Absolutely. Oh, I did promise one thing, too. If you look at your well charts, Mr. Schwartz recommended that we do a 10% percentile versus the 75%. That'll be in next month's well graphs, too.
Thank you. Other than that, I just have one thing for the future agenda.
Okay, Vice President Berger.
Yes, I'm a bit chagrined that we don't have a better analysis on the step points for running the plant. I do know that, I know there's an ESHA issue. I tend to think that that's going to go away, but to wait 9 months before we make a policy decision on when we would run this, if we were to get if we were to get the permit to run on a regular basis, or when we need to, what those tick points would be. And we talked a little bit, I'm looking at the page 40, what is it, page 96, the Sensing and Wellfield level summary. And, you know, it looks like we're doing, as mentioned by Director Farmer last month, the well levels are actually looking pretty good. In San Simeon, they're doing well. And when I look, and one thing you can give me credit or blame for is that when we were running through the crisis after 2014 and we needed to put an emergency water supply system in place, is that we were looking at the San Simeon well field, which was being threatened by saltwater intrusion, and we were actually below our permit level in the WBE well. So every time I'm here, I look at the WBE well, and I notice it's 3.66. So it's well enough above 3 feet that that aquifer is not being challenged. And I look at the gradient in San Simeon. The gradient right now in San Simeon, it's August, and it's 2.23. When it gets down to 0, we can only use it for a period of time. I've kind of mentioned this before. But those two things, when you're looking at the health of the San Simeon and Santa Rosa Creeks, if they're as healthy as they are now, those are the things we should watch for. Now, we know I'll be prepared next month to be able to show what the history was over the past 15 years. I'm going through 15 years worth of documents here and Excel spreadsheets to show a graph, and I'll be glad to share that with the staff. So those checkpoints, and I think you can have 3. You can have Santa Rosa, WBE well, San Simeon, gradient, and catastrophic loss. That's the beginning point I would like to look at. And I would think there should be a recommendation that we run it every July, August, and September, or August, September, and October. And I think the Coastal Commission and the community would realize that we're doing this to protect our aquifers. We're exercising the unit. We're not producing a heck of a lot of water each time, so it's not going to be a lot of expense because we don't have to run it 24/7. The design capacity of 200 and some acre feet, we've never done that. I do notice, though, in 2015, we had a constituent that said that we haven't ever produced any water to drink, and we produced 68.92 acre feet from the AWTP. If you can see that on there. And then in 2016, I see we had 23.07 acre feet. So the fact that and that was drinkable water, we didn't drink it all, but I mean, we did produce. This plant has run, it has effectively produced water and can make our aquifers reliable and environmentally protected. So that's my comment.
Director Pearson.
When you mentioned this to me, I looked into our ordinances, and we have an ordinance that describes exactly how we're supposed to be doing this now. And we need to be looking at the October SOE and subtracting 0.12 from that. Yeah.
But that wasn't effective, and yes, we should change that, but I mean.
Yeah, we're going to have to.
Clear.
There's
We're going to have to
already some
revise
things in
that
the
one, I
works.
think,
Yeah,
is
we
what
do.
we're going to have
Sure.
to do.
We do. And that's
Because that
it's
one's
on-
way too
It's on the
complex.
calendar, it's just not yet, because we had a bunch of things first.
But the October SOE is very good. It's 0.7, which means that there's an El Nino coming, which is portends
If
good
the-
for us,
If those
right?
calculations are correct, yeah.
So,
Yeah, it had been.
Yeah. Director Farmer.
With regard to this facility producing water, I think what it does, and you could correct me in my ignorance, but I believe it blends creek water, correct? The facility.
It treats water and re-injects it into
Into the ground.
into the ground so that it boosts the levels near our wells.
I think you might be confused the fact that there is a mitigation where we will put 100 gallons a minute into the creek to help resolve the downstream, the ocean lagoon, but that's a mitigation level. What we've done is in creating that 68 acre feet, we might have diverted 100 gallons a minute for the days that we were running it to help the lagoon, but that's the primary purpose, is to re-inject the water into the ground and pull it out in our wells, put it in our storage tanks, shower and drink it.
Okay. I'd like to address page 88. Under engineer, and we dropped under sustainable water facility, and dropped down about 4 bullet points here, and it says Chief Plant Operator Jim Green continues to work on preparations to allow restarting the facility as may be needed later this fall. And then it says staff continue to have regular meetings to review progress. So I just wanted to ask, and I think this came up previously at this meeting, why would we need to start this facility later this fall, especially since both the general manager and the chief engineer have commented that we likely wouldn't need to do so. It doesn't appear that we're anywhere close to any type of stage 3 emergency. So I just don't quite understand why it says to restarting the facility as may be needed when it appears fairly clear that it probably won't be needed.
I think that's a good question, Director Farmer. I think at least from my perspective, we would be negligent if we didn't position ourselves to be able to start that facility, even if we don't need to. Also, we're hoping that we can run it from a perspective of it's called a recirculation standpoint that would not require the triggering of a stage 3, but would give the outgoing operator, Larry Moore, who's retiring in December, the opportunity to train Mr. Green on the operation of that facility. Essentially what we'd be doing is recirculating it, and it would not be required to have a stage 3. And it's a good question. I think from my standpoint as your general manager, I just want to make sure that from a precautionary standpoint, if we have to run it, we're able to. If you recall the weather pattern characteristics last year, and if you look at the well graphs, we're looking pretty good. We really are. The graphs that show where we are, average compared to previous years. But if we don't get rains early on, then it could be problematic towards the late fall, that time frame. So we don't have a crystal ball. If we get early rains, I think we're going to be fine. I've said that. But again, if we don't get early rains, I want to be in a position to be able to operate that system. So I know it seems like double speak a little bit, and I can appreciate your concerns about that, but that's kind of where I'm coming from. I don't want to have like a Chinese fire drill. We're running around trying to get everything calibrated and the membranes cleaned and make sure all the instrumentation's running and all the tanks and everything's functioning properly. We should always be it's like a fighter plane, a fighter plane's always ready to go when something happens. So that's kind of the mode that we're in.
Okay.
We want to be able to run that, so.
All right, so I think if I could just say this, maybe if you mentioned somewhere in here that restarting the facility would be as much for training purposes as well as potential emergencies. That might have people out there saying, okay, now I understand the process. And also, your point's well taken. We've had, years recently where the rain started fairly late in the season, so I'm not going to, overlook that. And we have to thank Mother Nature for that 5 inches of rain that we got in March and the ongoing conservation measures taken by the majority of people in this community.
Absolutely.
For the well levels that we have right now.
Absolutely, I agree with you.
Yeah. Now, if I could just ask one more thing real quickly.
Sure.
And both you and President Rice discussed this with regard to working with county planning on the regular coastal development permit process. Do we have any idea? I mean, there's been a constant speculation. This isn't going to take place until maybe the end of 2019. Do we have, especially since, the county planning is just the beginning, then it goes to Board of Supervisors and then to the Coastal Commission. Do we have any kind of time frame as to when we'll finally be hearing back from county planning?
Yeah, I asked Erilyn, who has been heading up these efforts in conjunction with us, when can we anticipate this matter going before the Planning Commission? That was that email, and I'll make sure I make a note to forward that onto the board. That was about a month ago, and at that time he said 4 to 5 months. Again, as District Council Carmel indicated, that there's some key ESHA work that needs to be done between our biologist and the Coastal Commission biologist. But all that work that Cindy Cleveland's work is identified in her professional services agreement relating to the taking and things like that doesn't have to be completed. So although her work may take, a year or so, it doesn't necessarily all have to be completed. So to answer your question, about a month ago, I asked Erilyn when he thinks this would go to the Board of Supervisors, and he said about 4 to 5 months. So what I want to do is I want to send that email to the board, but I also want to reach out to Erilyn again and ask him, is that still a realistic timeline, so I can give the board an answer.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we have future agenda items.
Just one,
Yes.
one quick one. The general manager.
We also have a public comment on
Okay,
future
good.
agenda.
The general manager has been trying to get the point across that to the public that there has been during his tenure a whole host of things that have been repaired, corrected, and helped. We're talking about major upgrades to the water department, major upgrades to doing manholes with the budget that he had. Even some things that were almost determined to be an emergency, he was able to get the Stewart Street tank at least limped along. I had some emails from constituents that continue to say that the infrastructure's crumbling and nothing's been done about it. And these documents, we continue not to allow the general manager to tout some of the improvements that have been made to the infrastructure. And I just want to laud him for having done as much as he did with as little as he's been given from a budget perspective.
Maybe we can do a town hall so he can actually give a presentation to folks that would be interested in such a thing. Just as thought. I've got on future agenda items, I've got one public comment slip. Mike Lyons.
Thank you. Yes, I'll be brief. In this morning's Tribune, front page, big headline, a very important story that has to do with the state's crisis for affordable housing. And the solution that's coming along is proposed by the state, which would devolve into smaller entities like cities and unincorporated areas that would revolve around accessory dwelling units. And this has a great impact here in our community in a couple of ways, and I think we should, I'm going to suggest that the board or someone agendize this so that our community stays up with what the county is doing. The way I see it, there are two important impacts. One is in water. There are some certain rules that imposed by the state that do not allow water districts to penalize new incoming residents, so that you can't keep people out for that reason. But this has huge ramifications here regarding the Build-Out Reduction Committee and people who have been waiting for 20 years or more for building rights. So that's important to establish the priorities. If someone is allowed to build an accessory dwelling unit on the back of their house and therefore incur more residents locally and therefore more water use, assuming we have a finite amount of water, which we've been going under the assumption that for many years, that drains the water down to the point where we may have to tell the people who have been waiting for 20 years to build their homes, I'm very sorry you can't do that because we've run out of water regarding the safety of our current residents in the community. So that has a huge impact. The other impact is budget. I noticed that in the green sheet today, there are at least 3 funds that benefit from, they get some of their income and sometimes primary income from property taxes. If we allow someone to build a private home, that's automatically going to have a much higher property value than an addition of a bedroom onto an existing home. And that means that in the long run, we have to plan for reduced revenue if we put all of our resources into these accessory dwelling units. So in order to make sure that we don't get overruled by the state or the county policies and we are able to control our own destiny, I suggest that somewhere along the line, the board maybe have an ad hoc committee or something like that to keep up with these matters so that we're all protected. Thanks.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Vice President Berenger.
Can I comment on that? On Tuesday,
Briefly.
Brief comment. On Tuesday, the Board of Supervisors did get a presentation on auxiliary dwelling units. And yes, it'll have a severe, or not a severe, it'll have a very beneficial effect for us in Cambria because the NCAC is trying to address the affordability of people living here. And by having an accessory dwelling unit not requiring the owner to be in the major unit, the permit is going to be ministerial, meaning that it's not discretionary. Therefore, it will be done and it will be allowed. And the state has put some severe restrictions on that where special districts, cities, and counties cannot prevent them from occurring. So there are some issues that I'm going to try and read and listen to it. I missed the meeting on Tuesday, but the plan is to have something in place in 2018, in August of, 19, and until then, the state rules, which are no rules, apply. So the county's trying to live within its particular jurisdiction. And it will affect us, and hopefully in a positive way for providing more affordable housing and people being able to build a garage or an accessory dwelling unit, helping the rental market.
Just hearing your discussion and knowing in my brain the discussion that's happening, I think that it is something that the board may want to consider bringing forward as a policy. Director Farmer?
Yes, it's something that I know I've brought up before, perhaps others have as well, but one of the dilemmas that's being faced in our community right now is the increase in vacation rentals and Airbnbs. And as a result, there are fewer long-term rentals available. You have many members of the business community complaining that their employees can no longer afford to live here for two reasons. Either the rents are being increased, and often these rents are being increased by people that may own the home, but they don't live here, yet they're increasing rents for their own personal financial self-interest. And I know I'm making a generalization, so this may not apply to every homeowner that is, doing a vacation rental out of this area, but considering the well-being of our community with regard to housing comes before the financial improvement of somebody's pocketbook that doesn't even live here. So what you have is more and more dwellings becoming, like I said, vacation rentals and Airbnbs, so people can no longer either afford to live here or they have no place to live. That's a real dilemma. I understand what Mr. Lyon said with regard to the drain on water if you have long-term rentals. I would wonder who ultimately uses more water. People that live here full-time and know the consequences of water use, or people that are using it as a vacation rental who come here, have no awareness, and are just here to enjoy the beauty of Cambria. I'm not knocking tourists. We've all been one, but I'm just pointing out the contradiction and the conundrum that we're in.
And there are very limited things we can do as a community services district since we don't have land use authority, but there are some places where we can kind of work some things regarding vacation rentals and the way that they get permitted, and there's some spots where we might be able to.
We don't have land use, but
we don't have land use, but there are things that we could either authorize or say we're not going to allow it relating to additional.
State law is going to overrule.
So this is
quick comment.
also off of the agenda of future agenda items, and I think it's an appropriate thing that sounds like we would have good discussion on.
Right.
I have a couple
one quick comment. ADUs can only be long-term rentals. They can't be a short-term rental.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you for that clarification. Future agenda item?
Future agenda item.
Yep.
Getting off of that
Sock it to
topic,
me.
please. Both of the standing committees have asked for us to consider the structure and membership of those committees, and I think at the next meeting, if we could have a discussion and maybe revise and revamp how those are structured and that kind of thing.
I kind of thought that was one of the directives that the board had given to the committees to come up with, but if they're saying pushing it back to us, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. We'll add that.
To solve that.
I have two future agenda items for consideration, not necessarily next month, but sometime in the soon future. One is I'd like to look at our water efficiency plan, because that was 5 years ago, and it might be a good time in conjunction with updating our urban water management plan next year to be looking at it and seeing if we're meeting the goals of that efficiency plan that we purchased in 2013 and put into place. And in light of the issues relating to emergencies, maybe we could consider on a future agenda item an additional emergency route out of town, like out of the top of the world area, across the top of the, there's an easement up there toward the old Air Force base. Yeah, so maybe that's something that the board would want to consider, since we have a partial easement in the area where the tank is. So those are my future agenda items that I'd like to see at some point. Director Farmer?
Well, President Rice, it's nice to hear you talking about the issue of water efficiency. Since I've brought that up in the past, including perhaps considering a standing committee or a subcommittee around, since that is the main way that the state is encouraging us to move forward is water efficiency. And I have, brought up in the past the idea of having, like I said, either a standing committee or a subcommittee to address water resourcefulness and grant funding, and that was kind of poo-pooed. So I'm glad to know it's back up on the horizon.
Sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'll let you make your point.
I was just gonna make a motion to include the suggestion about the standing committees and the structure of the standing committees. I would move that we have future agenda items on the structure of the standing committees, an additional emergency exit route out of town, and a review of the water efficiency plan, and the accessory dwelling unit potential impacts. No time constraint on any of those. They may not come up right away, but so I would move that those 4 items be on a future agenda. Can I get a second?
I second that.
So I moved and seconded for under discussion. Director Farmer.
No, I don't have any further discussion. It's just that my light remained on.
I like it when your light's on.
Even when there's nobody home?
I didn't say that. All right, let's have a roll call vote. Did you get the motion?
President Rice?
Aye.
Director Pearson?
Aye.
Director Wharton?
Aye.
Director Farmer?
Aye.
Vice President Berenger?
I don't support that because, sometime in the future, I'll make a motion for another agenda item, but I'll say aye.
So that motion passes 5-0.
Sure. I'll make another
Vice
motion
President Berenger.
that I think that we should look at the triggers for starting the plant under emergency condition, and also provide guidance to the county and the Coastal Commission as to what type of use we would use if it were to be approved on a regular basis, and I would like that to be addressed on next month's agenda.
I second that, and I think it's already planned, but I'd second that. Let's make sure there's majority of the board that it would agree with that, having on that agenda next month. The triggers for starting the operation.
Finishing the discussion we started last month?
Yes,
Yeah.
correct.
Okay. Absolutely.
Roll call?
Roll call?
Roll call, please.
Vice President Berenger?
Aye.
President Rice?
Aye.
Director Wharton?
Aye.
Director Farmer?
Okay.
Director Pearson?
Aye.
That passes unanimously. So on next month's agenda, Mr. Gruber, we will have that discussion.
I have a future agenda item that I'd like to present.
Director Farmer.
That I think has a time frame element to it. This is something that's been brought up from various members of the public in public comment. I feel, since we are asking for a new rate increase, that it would be wise on our part to somehow allow the community to know how the current rate increase is being spent. And I don't mean like in generalities, vague generalities. And I know this is going to kind of put a burden on our interim finance manager, officer. I'm glad he's done with the fiscal year budget. But I'm wondering if there's a way that he can determine how the current rate increase monies are being used. What are they being used for? Why? How much? Because right now, there's a strong push out there in the community to not improve any of this rate increase. And it's mainly because people don't trust us to use the monies wisely. So if we can let them know how the current rate increase is being used, what benefit they are gaining, as well as what the district is gaining, I think we'd have a better chance of getting at least the infrastructure part of the rate increase approved. That's my suggestion for a future agenda item that kind of has a time element to it. Thank you.
So the motion is to have a staff report that includes that information? Is that?
Whichever way it can be done. That's a future agenda item. I'd love to make a motion on it right now, but since we're talking about future agenda items.
Well, that's what you should do then, make a motion. That we have a report that says that.
All right. I will make a motion that at next month's meeting, we have a how could we say it, substantial and specific report on how the current rate increase monies are being used, where, why, and how.
Is there a second? As for lack of a second, I think that the staff has heard your request, though, and perhaps we would be able to have more of something that's more substantial in your general manager's report. You did a good job documenting in all these pictures.
Right.
So.
And as part of the discussion, not to let it drop, but I mean, I think that we're seeing expenditures reports. And unless I'm missing something, I think directing staff to jump through any kind of other hoop to make it more. Anyway, I think the information is adequate so far.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we're going to adjourn to closed session. Thank you for everybody for coming and staying.